Kingdom of Heaven audio commentary with director Ridley Scott, actor Orlando Bloom and screenwriter William Monahan. To coordinate this audio with the film, I have the film on standby, ready for the 20th Century Fox drumroll in a moment. This commentary is brought to you by the Cine and Science YouTube channel. Please note that the commentary is designed to be played along with the movie, and therefore the director and other commentators sometimes decide to pause for long periods during their commentary. So please play the movie at a comfortable sound level whilst listening to the commentary. For reasons of copyright, we cannot reproduce audio from the movie during this commentary, and we thank you for your understanding in this.
Hello, I'm Ridley Scott. I'm the director of this production, Kingdom of Heaven. When Bill Monahan, the writer of the screenplay, almost 4 years ago now, said, let me write this because the Crusades is one of my favorite periods in history, and Bill is a history buff. And then he came back to me saying that actually our story should take place between the Second and Third Crusade because the Crusaders and the Muslims were enjoying an uneasy truce or an uneasy peace. And he said in that space in time, we can explore both sides as fairly as we can possibly present them. So it was always an uneasy task, an uneasy production, particularly in these times today where we're going to be talking about the Muslim community and also about the Christian or Catholic community and their relationships with each other. In this story, there are bound to be seen as bad Muslims, but also what we found for the most part were some very balanced and fair Muslims who actually fundamentally tolerated our presence in their land.
I'm William Monahan. I wrote Kingdom of Heaven. I met Ridley in New York City to talk about a script of mine called Tripoli. And in the course of the breakfast, he asked me if I knew anything about knights. It was sort of mind-blowing. He was talking about directing one film written by me and asked me if I had another one in my pocket. And as it happened, I did.
Would begin in France with this character called Balian, who actually by name historically, actually the person who did surrender Jerusalem to the Muslims at this particular juncture. Other than that, if you work backwards from the Balian character, everything else prior to that is actually fictitious. From this moment on, which is from the beginning, we're finding Balian as to be a blacksmith, a man of property, a man with a brain, a man with a skill, which in these particular times was relatively unusual, and therefore a person who was to be envied. In other words, he had a future, he had a plan, and he had skills.
Hey, I'm Orlando Bloom, and I play Balian. I remember reading this script on a plane. I was flying into Los Angeles. I'd just finished working on Troy, which was another big period piece, and I was quite reluctant to read this script because I had sort of had it in my mind that I didn't want to do another period piece. But obviously this was a movie that Ridley Scott was directing, and it was a movie about the Crusades, and that was all very exciting. And so I was reading it, and I remember turning to the friend I was with and just saying, wow, this script is really good. I really like this character. I really understand who this man is. Then I got off the plane in LA, and I pretty much went straight to a meeting with Ridley, which was good to see him, hadn't seen him since Black Hawk, really, and all he really did was throw me out of a helicopter in Black Hawk Down. So we sat down and talked for a few hours about the project and about what he wanted to do with it and how he saw the character and how I saw the character. And and he said, well, why don't you just come in tomorrow and we'll put you on tape, and if you could have a look at these scenes overnight and stuff. So there was some delay, I can't quite remember how, but anyway, I basically ended up with like 9 hours to learn these 3 scenes of dialogue. And I can't explain it, but it just sort of made sense to me. The character made sense to me, and although the scenes were difficult, I just felt really good about having learnt them and who this man was, who this Balian character was. So I went in the next day. We were on the lot in Fox Studios. They stuck a fake beard on my face, they put blood on my forehead and dirt all over me and chainmail on my back, and I was sort of standing there thinking, all right, I can do this. And I just had a really great working session with Ridley. We spent an hour going through it, I think. And that was really it for like a few months. And then I remember just thinking, well, I did what I could do, did my best. And then there was like about 3 months or so. And I remember thinking it was quite a long time until I got a phone call to say that the role was mine. It was one of those memories of like, wow, I'm going to be this guy in one of Ridley Scott's kind of dream projects, which was pretty exciting, to say the least.
This part of the film here isn't actually shot in France, it's shot in the foothills of the Pyrenees. So we're actually on the Spanish side of the Pyrenees, but I chose to shoot here because of the keep. The castle is still spectacularly in good condition, or has been looked after over all these years. The castle itself almost predates our particular period. Actually, the castle is almost just over 900 years old. And around the castle we would build, with Arthur Max's skill and designs, we would actually build small hamlets that would be Balin's place of abode. Within that place of abode, probably one of the most important tradesmen in there would be the blacksmith. So he was a relatively important character within this very, very extremely rural community. Rurality in terms of the way we never see it today. Really basic, primitive.
It was very cold in Loire. Very, very cold. The snow actually was a snow machine, although we did have a hailstorm on one evening, which slowed down filming a little bit. But not too much, because it's there's not really much that slows down Ridley Scott on a movie. As an actor working on a huge production like this, often there can be times where hours, even days, can go past because of hiccups in filming, and really there was no obstacle that was big enough to prevent Ridley shooting something. He has an incredible appetite for directing and making movies, and it's something that inspires everyone around him to do their best to achieve and to raise their game in order to keep the ball moving. So although this was a huge production, we really moved along at quite a pace. And for actors, you know, it's a great experience because you feel like you have some sense of continuity and you don't get stuck in a rut, as it were.
In the first cut, which is almost 40 minutes shorter, I don't include myself in this because actually I was part of the process of, you know, helping and advising and being with Bill on the design of the screenplay. And so I don't really agree with this, that there was some confusion or even diffusion as to who did what to who and how did she die. I think it's actually very straightforward. But somehow or other it kept occurring as questions. We try to fix it in every other way except the right way, which is simply to let it run as long as it runs right now. We, of course, always felt it was interesting, even fascinating, that the church laws could be as stringent and severe as that, and that in itself was enough to actually be impressive to keep your interest. But we removed this, and now this longer version, I think when you watch it, you'll see it's all very clear. Also, I think there's a tendency today to say, let's get to the story quicker, and we're going to put the film out onto movie houses. I think the value of this digital market is that people are more willing or more ready to sit at home and actually enjoy the longer version. Thank God for DVD.
In this version of the movie, which is in keeping with what we had in the script, the priest is in fact my brother. And I always remember reading this character, and Michael Sheen did a fantastic job of portraying this corrupt priest, this really nasty, nasty man.
The younger brother is, I think, if you like, almost corrupted by his poverty, his own poverty, and a curious jealousy for his older brother, Orlando, who actually is a man who is born with a talent, which I think the talent is rare, because with the talent is linked a brain, with the brain is linked invention. And there is this palpable jealousy between the priest brother and Balian, which seems to be founded in this, that Balian got everything, probably through his own hands and his own making, but including the wife, including the child, and including a life, so that to a certain extent we feel the brother is not entirely evil. I think he's just jealous. And of course, if you consider jealousy, then you might consider jealousy to be one of the evils, particularly in these particular times. Because the brother could certainly become manipulative and could certainly place him in situations which were out of Balian's control. And is actually designing Balian's journey to the Holy Land. He's trying to persuade Balian, and certainly the Crusaders, to persuade them to take Balian as a useful person to have on the road as a blacksmith, to take him along with them to the Crusades. By doing that, the brother or the church, the local church, will take over these dwellings, these buildings, in other words, the forge and the farm. Not much by our standards, but in those days, that would be valuable.
I think Michael Sheen gives a terrific performance. I was sorry to see it cut out of the theatrical. You know, seeing the entire Cain and Abel subtext cut out of the theatrical was a bit distressing in itself.
Most of the first act, I remember in the script, was depicted without dialogue. For Balian, he was really this character moving through life in a really sort of depressed, nihilistic state. So with this version of the film, what's great is you see why. You see the scene with the priest and the bishop explains how Balian is no madder than anyone else. He's just a man who is suffering from the loss. He's grieving. He's lost his family. And you see Balian taking the baby's crib on an almost funeral sort of march down to the forge, where he then burns it. And his first line in the movie is "to work." For me, that was great to see all of that intact, because it explains more clearly the state that this man is in.
These angle irons are for the church itself. There's something to do with the staging of the church being built.
I learned to do this with a blacksmith, a farrier, who came over from England. It's very hard work. Pretty painful on the shoulder because the hammers are really heavy. But the sparks just fly everywhere. Normally today, people would wear gloves and goggles. But of course back then, they wouldn't have, had goggles, certainly. And Ridley didn't want me wearing gloves, so I got a few burn blisters all over the place. A couple on my cheek and on my hands from the flying spark.
So here it's established again, you're an armorer. And his brother, of course, starts to try to sell him. He's made engines that throw the largest stone. Yeah, a little more credible as defender of Jerusalem, isn't it? A lot of the criticism of the film that came out was based on people questioning how a simple blacksmith who had had one sword fight with his father could end up defending Jerusalem. And, of course, all that's actually in the film as it was written and shot. He was in no way the simple blacksmith of the theatrical cut. He's sort of a provincial Leonardo. He's literate, and as we later see, he's not only an experienced war veteran, but a disillusioned one.
I used to call filmmakers the last of the explorers, which I think they are, but I think we're actually the last of the time travelers, because the one reason I really love to do this kind of film, if you look at my filmography, it's certainly peppered with period films, even the first one being Duelists, then there's 1492, then there's Gladiator, and so there's 4 fairly major period pieces right there. I love to create the world that, I know I keep saying this, and I've said this before, but I actually think the real enjoyment is creating an environment and a world that you feel lives, within which you're going to put your characters. And that's going to become, the one of the characters in the movie is how the film is presented. So standing here on a daily basis in January on the foothills of the Pyrenees with all these people dressed this way, eating medieval food, with horses, shoeing the horses, the smell of the burning horn on the feet. I really felt I was at that particular period. And that is really one of the thrills of doing this. And the smell of the livestock, the smell of the chickens. And you're literally in a time warp. You've got a modern unit standing in a time warp. That's if it's done properly. And that's my job. That's one of my big additions to what I do as a filmmaker, is I make sure the whole world that I'm dealing with is absolutely real. And that's an orchestration because, you know, there's Arthur Max, there's Janty Yates, there's Simon the Armourer, there's the people who design the food, there's the people who dress the sets. All are carefully chosen because they're all, I think, the best at it. This is why I think this film should be acknowledged this year for all those crafts I've just mentioned. Not to mention John Matheson, the cameraman, who captures the beauty of this particular time and period. But that's certainly one of the things where I'm attracted to this. And if there were to be sequels of this movie, I would actually jump in a flash to go and do the second and the third variation on this particular period, which is actually one of the most fascinating melting pots and absolute turmoils in history. I mean, every turmoil is usually fundamentally based on religion anyway. Religion creates wars and has done throughout time, and there's nothing new about that here.
Liam Neeson is a fantastic actor and a great man. I was quite intimidated at this stage in the movie, pretty much throughout the movie, actually. It was a huge production. But I remember Liam being very incredibly supportive, and he came down on set, and the day before he left, and he wasn't working, and he was around, and he was just so encouraging. He just was a really great friend and comrade and colleague.
In Palma del Rio, Liam Neeson and I were talking about Godfrey simply being an Irish father, you know, that sort of gruffness. And he picked up on it immediately. The sort of Irish father who won't give you the time of day or listen to your troubles and then at the end of it say, do you need any money? You know? People have been strangely slow to grasp how good this film is. It was awesome to show up on the set. I think Ridley talked about the first thing being making sure that everyone's up at 8 a.m. with a coffee in their hands, and, you know, that was impressive. Extraordinarily, this line was taken by some people to be the actual directions to Jerusalem rather than a joke. It's amazing what people don't know. Of course, it's sometimes amazing what they do.
So Balian, whilst I think still very deeply religious, as everyone would be at this particular juncture in history, everyone would very fervently be a believer in their God and therefore would carry all the load of guilt and sin with them all the time. It would be something that made religion very unattractive for a while because the younger generation do not want to hear about that. They don't want to hear about if you drink too much, it's a sin. If you have sex, it's a sin. If you do this, it's a sin. And it seems that all the things where you have a good time in life are a sin. So I think that's why a large portion of the church has lost it in recent years in terms of actually reviewing who and where we are today. Church is an audience, has an audience. That is the audience. The congregation is the audience. And I don't want to turn this into a political or religious narrative, but we've thought about it very carefully. So it's all in here if you're really looking for it. We see the Balian character really a man of silence for a large part of the first act, who finally erupts in fury at and to a churchman, albeit his brother, who says the unfortunate words, although what she's doing in hell without a head, I don't know, which means that when he had denied being present at the burial of the wife, Balian did not want to address the fact not only did they bury her on this non-hallowed ground, but also he did not want even to know, did they remove the head or did they not? Now the brother unfortunately admits they did, and so we see murder.
This sequence was a mad sequence to shoot. A lot of that is CGI flame work, but there was no blue screen. Michael stepped in and laid down on the coals and then stepped out. And then we had like a stunt guy who was in flameproof gear with a suit on and everything. He then stepped into it, and we did this sequence where I pulled him out and he was on fire, and then he ran across the room on flames. It was one of those stunts where you just didn't want to be that guy who was covered in gunge and goop from the fireproofing stuff and then had masks on and everything else. But you sort of wonder how those things are actually going to work, and I think it works really well. In this version, you see there's a lot of justification for everything he does, which I think really adds another layer and another dimension.
Despite what the titles say at the beginning of the film, Godfrey did not return to France in search of his son. He happened to be passing through his home territory on the way to Rome to try to elicit papal support. And while he was in town, he thought, well, I remember I threw one to the blacksmith's wife. So, you know, it was more casual than that. It wasn't an idea that he had come back specifically looking for his son.
As the story unfolds, we meet crusaders who in those days were probably regarded with awe, with envy, and in fact very much as if we might look at the word rock star today. They were very mysterious and very colourful figures who would pass through, go down the Holy Land. Some would return, some would not. Some would return from the Holy Land poorer than when they went. Some would return from the Holy Land far richer than when they went. Some stayed down there because they died there or were killed there, and some stayed down there because they became men of property, which we find out during this story. So the Holy Land, in many respects, was also regarded, this juncture, as the New World.
I knew a great deal about the period of the Latin Kingdom before I took the commission, and I undertook to learn a great deal more. I tended to know more about the period than the historians who Fox asked to vet the script, because I was intimate with the original historiography of the Latin Kingdom, while it was not necessarily the area of specialization of those asked to comment. If Ridley and I omit something, you can be sure it's not because we don't know it. There's always a dramatic or practical reason.
This was a great father and son moment, learning to fight. Very much a sort of rite of passage, if you like. When Liam shows me the High Guard move, it's really interesting. There were so many pieces of this film that we shot, and then there was a follow-through to them. They were kind of mirrored later in the movie. So when he shows me that, and he takes the butt of the sword, the handle of the sword, and jabs it to my throat, moments later when we're in the middle of the ambush, it's a move that Balian does. And all of that was thought through by Ridley, by the stunt guys. It was like, okay, this guy has certainly got some ability with the sword, but he's also, because he's an engineer, because he's an artificer, because he has a way with what's physical, he's able to pick up lessons that he learns like that and really put them straight into action. So moments later, he's doing that move on a guy in the forest in the middle of the ambush scene, where he jabs the butt of the sword into a guy's face. That was a theme that went throughout the movie. You'd see a detailed piece of action, and it would be mirrored later in the movie. There was a follow-through to it. That was one of the things that I loved most about the script.
So the idea of chain mail is just crude iron. It's actually iron. It's not tempered iron, not like tempered steel, like on a sword that we learned to temper steel, actually from the Romans. The chain mail is made of lots of teeny little rings. Some men going to the Crusades would sell their house, to afford to buy a tunic of chainmail. That's how expensive it was. Because it was handmade, hand-ringed, and would stop a point of a sword or a hack of a sword. Probably what you'd get is a tremendous, bruise on you from the blow of a sword, as if an octopus had a good old suck at you through all the rings, with the force of the blade coming down. Basically would not break the rings. And I figured if they're always going to be rusting, because if you're out in weather all the time, it's always rusting. So you must have to put something on. What do you put on? So I think you're not going to be able to carry butter with you. You might be able to carry a can of oil, but what would that oil be? Probably animal oil. Therefore, what you'd probably do is kill game, drain fat off, make a batter, and rub it into the mail. So I made that up. And I figured if you mix the batter, sand from the river bank, remember all these rivers would be super clean, those days, sand and water from the river bank, mixed into fat, you've got an abrasive, and actually you're shining the armor as well as protecting it. I don't know whether it's historically correct, but I made it up. And it sounds right, doesn't it? It sounds good. I mean, literally you climb into all these details and these ridiculous conversations with the various departments, which I find incredibly fascinating.
And, of course, you notice Balian by no means looks like a kid who's just had his first 5-minute sword lesson. He's been around the block a few times. David Thewlis was very impressed by his stunt rider for this. David's terrified of horses. And it was a bit funny that he had the best rider in Europe doubling for him.
Odo is a good German actor, actually, who actually was one of those guys who picked up an 800-pound end of a truck. Pick it up. He was one of the guys who put the harness on and would stand up or pull a truck with his teeth uphill. The strongest man alive. And then I saw him in a Werner Herzog movie and thought, who the hell's that bloke? And he was pretty good. So he comes in as the hugely strong piece of manpower. And I think the great thing about the way this film is structured, and the way Bill structured the first act, was you're picking up with a team of guys that you think is going to be the wild bunch or the dirty half dozen. By the end of the first act, they're all dead, which is really more about what life's about, I think, in these particularly violent times. You could die from an oyster. You could die from snapping your leg. You could die from a cut. There's no antibiotics. But I think there was a lot of information and knowledge herbally. And I think modern medicine is actually now looking into a lot of the things that were working then that are still thought to be old granny's cures for things, ailments, but actually I think they work. It's understanding the chemistry of what these natural things had.
And of course, David Thewlis's character essentially being God, it means a little bit more than a knighting. I think it was kept secret from David that he was playing God or at least some sort of angel, but I think he figured it out anyway.
And so now we've already lost the people we thought. Well, we've lost 2, 3. We're going to lose Liam shortly, who takes an arrow up his armpit, and by continuing fighting, snapped the head off. And so he's now got a barbed head inside his rib cage, probably 2 inches in. And if you've ever pricked your finger, can you imagine trying to get out a barbed arrowhead without? No. And so his time is limited. which will happen. Oh, this is a great scene that we had where they've got one survivor left from this, and he played it with a lisp, which I thought was great. He says, I am Wodja, that's Roger, Wodja de Cormier, and I am owed the privilege of Wensum, which means, which actually in those days, because he's an aristocrat, he is privileged to be ransomed and kept alive. And judge and adjudicator is the boss, is Liam, who says, that's right, walks away, and they execute it. Because he's a bad man, bad guy. Then you have a little bit of medicine here, a little bit of surgery, which is basically a pair of pliers and trying to twist the head out between the two. It's probably gone in beyond the two, into the rib cage beyond the two bones. Probably snapping the bones in the process, but now not being able to pull it out. He gives what I thought was a brief medical journal view on either, you're fundamentally in the hands of God. It'll either grow a cyst and you'll be okay, or if the bone is broken and the marrow goes into the blood, which I didn't know, you will die. If your marrow mixes with your blood, that's not good. And I think there's so much information as you go through this, which is kind of subliminal and all very interesting if you know what to look for. These guys are just cowboys. You know, this is basically join a wagon train to go across country. And except when they get there, they'll have the same problem. You're on their land. You're on their territory. Shouldn't be there. That's another world to tackle as Westerns, you see. I'm going to do that soon.
I can't believe they put this line in. That's fantastic. To kill an infidel is not murder. It is the path to heaven. That's a pretty powerful thing to say, which was true at the time. It was all about blind faith, you know, and a lot can get achieved with blind faith. It can be good or bad.
Interesting thing about doing my job, that old guy there he says, God knows, God only knows. I did a television show with him almost 40 years ago. He didn't remember, but I did. And I thought, my goodness, he's still alive, you know. But he was great. Finding an interesting bad guy is always the best way. The ones that have depth and character, and you're not sure whether you like them or not. But there's something about him which is kind of flamboyant and charming and swashbuckling. And I think Martin fulfilled that role as Guy de Lusignan.
Martin's a little over the top, but I love it.
These characters are all the people we're dealing with throughout the story from this point on are actually historically accurate, more or less.
We didn't use any secondary sources. When I do historical, I want the eyewitnesses, the original voices. All the historians of the period use the same handful of 900-year-old historiographers and eyewitnesses. It's very colorful stuff, and not only do you need nothing else, there is nothing else. You've got William of Tyre, the Chronicle of Arnoul, the Arab writers, Ibn al-Athir, Imad ad-Din, Ba-ad-Din, and Usama ibn Munqid, you know, who was useful for color, and so on. Anyone interested in the period knows who the chroniclers were. There aren't many of them, and you know, every general history of the period is a rehash or recitation of the same original historiography, no matter what anybody says. You know, in this case, you can read the original Latin or Arabic historiography of the fall of Jerusalem, and you can see the bits that made into Kingdom of Heaven and how they were transformed or expanded on. You can see what was used and what wasn't used and why. What you use as a dramatist is what plays. It's all an eye for the things you can use, you know, incident, color, ideas, you know, that resonate with you personally. You use what plays or can be made to play, and you don't use what doesn't. So we know all about the missing bits.
So now in the story you've got the man who would be not king, but man who would be a leader. Gradually, everything is falling into his lap. And because of his natural sensitivity and smarts, intelligence, he knows it's not justified. He's not really a knight, he's not really a lord. But because of the way things are falling into place, he has no choice in the matter. So his father will now die from gangrene in his side, and therefore there'll be no saving him. And everyone knows this at this juncture. They know the father will never make the journey. All these journeys from the ports were very dangerous. I haven't yet had this confirmed, and I keep saying it, so I probably stand up to be corrected, but I believe at this juncture a steadfast, accurate, efficient rudder on a ship was still in the making. And therefore, they would go to sea, and it was always perilous. That's why I think those old hymns, for those in peril on the sea, were maybe very early, because a lot of these people would go on overloaded, horses, armor, swords, everything, hit high water, the bloody boat would turn over and they'd all drown. So the number of people drowning on the way down through to the North Africa was enormous proportion. So everyone was kind of fearful of getting on board a ship. Because think about it, in those days, probably most people couldn't even swim. You couldn't swim with the gear they've got on. You'd sink like a stone, right? So the idea of going across the sea would be quite an adventure and very perilous. I'm sure others crossed in good water, nice, Mediterranean weather, and didn't even ever experience. But I think for the most part, there's a large part of the Crusades were lost before they even got off the shore. Like a mile out and they would sink.
And anyone who thinks that the Crusades were all about religion is definitely crazy. There's an excuse. And it keeps saying, and I brought this up to Ridley, the Holy Land was the only place that a European could go before 1492. It was the only safety valve. It was the only place for, the dispossessed. And it was sort of the Wild West. And there are historians who will, traditional and usually Catholic historians who will fight you to the death on that point. And they'll maintain that the Crusades were all about religion. But, for any man who knows anything about the world, rather than dogmatism and tenure, it's perfectly obvious. It was, in many ways, a land of opportunity. And there are examples that you cannot dispute. Guy de Lusignan, for one, became king of Jerusalem when he just would have been a country layabout in France. Reynald of Chatillon was an adventurer. He went down there married and started rising through the ranks until he was Lord of Ultra-Jourdain. It's obvious that it was a land of opportunity. It's the truth.
The very early days of knighthood, I think probably prior to the touching of the sword on each shoulder, Bill assured me, at first I didn't know about it, and Bill told me it was absolutely accurate. It sounds great, so I was willing to buy it. It's almost like you get a slap across the face to make sure that you're paying attention. And it's the slap, the blow, was the signature. Later, it would become a little more elegant with the sword and the touch on two shoulders. I really like this because it's very closely woven into the idea of the religion, of faith, and still the idea of holiness being very closely associated to knightliness. And when half the time nobody really examined, as nobody would, we only have become politically correct in the last, I think probably the last second half of the last century, haven't we? Really? Where people are reanalyzing history, saying this, and this, and that doesn't make sense because all these people were going down into places where we write our version of history and saying, well, actually, wait a minute, it's 180 degrees opposite of that. We shouldn't have been going down there to do that.
The knighting scene, it was so informative for me, playing Balian, and really that knight's code of conduct became kind of a mantra for the character. And for me, it was It was everything that he was trying to be. And I used that as a framework for who this man was.
Here's something very important, and people seem to miss, especially in relation to Balin surviving the shipwreck. I mean, here, this angel basically says to Balin, he says, if God has purpose for you, he'll keep you safe. And in the original conception, I was going to start the script with a shipwreck on the coast, in the Holy Land, and come in on it, show all European civilization, essentially, the entire pilgrim world strewn in wreckage across the beach, and, you know, one man's alive in there. And Ridley wanted to come down from France, which I wanted to do too, but I was thinking about compression at the time. He basically said, don't worry about compression, it'll take care of itself. And then, you know, I went back and invented the whole French opening. You know, the bastard son bit.
This sequence came as a total surprise. We didn't shoot any of this. I mean, obviously, we shot parts of it, but I was never at sea. I think parts of it were taken from the siege, close-ups from, you know, the bombs going off and being in the siege, and parts of it were taken from, I think the ocean sequences were taken from the movie that Ridley had shot previously, White Squall. I was amazed at seeing this, but I think it's a really great sequence. It shows what happened. In the script, you cut from him leaving that port to the shipwreck scene here.
In that sequence there's a shot of the boat turning over and going down and rolling, which actually I borrowed from another movie I made called White Squall. Different schooner, different time. But that shot of the rolling ship, because it's upside down and underwater and you're disoriented, it actually worked out pretty well. We never planned to shoot a wreck, the wrecking of a boat. And so, in a way, it became a little bit of a problem because I didn't want to invest, being a sensible producer, in wrecking a ship and all those in it, just to get him on the far shore by himself without a horse. To do that, not only would it take up screen time, which was not really to do with the story, but also it would be very expensive. So I elected to say, I'll work it out. So I see him go to sea, and the montage, the evolution of how he ends up in the wreckage of the bottom of the boat, I think works pretty well. And as opposed to it costing us $5 million, it probably cost us $200,000. So it was a giant saving. But there was a little bit of unease when we were cutting it, with people saying, well, what happened? And I think it's quite clear, though, isn't it? No? I think it's good to sometimes let the secrets go. This sequence is funny because it was the last day of principal photography, end of 6 months shooting. Everybody was really weary, and everyone was just thinking of the minute I would say it's a wrap, so they could actually all bugger off back to the hotel, have a drink, and get the hell out of Dodge, right? And I was getting angrier and angrier because that's my job. I cannot drop the ball even on the last day of principal photography. And the wind was always blowing, and the wind was probably doing 60 kilometers an hour here, which was driving us crazy. The dunes we found are not these dunes. These dunes, we put these dunes in. So these are digitally put in. I think they're pretty good. The dunes we found were near the beach where the wreck was, to be sensible. And the dunes that Arthur found were actually terrible, with a couple of palm trees and then some ratty old dunes and a ratty old waterhole. And when I arrived, I thought, oh no. So from the second I was shooting it, I knew I'd be putting in those big dunes behind it. But later, the special effects, not MPC, Wes, the guy I had in-house, put all these dunes in himself, which I think are really good, don't you?
I write quite a bit of everything, a lot of the detail, even the detail in the first fight in the desert between Orlando and the Saracen, the blood flying into the eyes of the horse, causing him to rear and throw the guy. I did, but I can do what I like. And, you know, Ridley's going to do what he likes, change it or better it or anything else. But a lot of the times we agree very much on some things.
There was always the thing here, the viciousness of the attack and the danger of people saying, well, the first person he meets is Muslim and Arabic, and here he is being aggressive and challenging him. And I'm saying, you can argue that, yes. On the other hand, in these times, you would have that in France, you'd have that in England, you'd have it everywhere. It wouldn't be about religion, it'd be about the bloody horse. About saying, that horse is my horse. I want that horse. Or for you to come along this path, we have to fight. And he's saying, why? He said, because this is my path. He said, well, how can it be your path? Well, I'm taking a toll. I want you to pay me to pass through this path. That kind of craziness, which is a kind of highway robbery. And that's all this was about. Which then goes wrong. And the idea, would this character actually execute the Muslim lying on the ground? I think we know by now, never. He wouldn't do that. In fact, he's going to do a much more surprising thing, which is basically set him free. This is a marvelous shot, which is very digital, built digitally, which actually was a panning shot from the top of ABH, Ahbenadu, which was where I was shooting Golgotha. And I was standing there one night with the twilight and the sun suddenly hit. It was fantastic. So that's what you've got to be ready for. That. I just said, shoot it, shoot it. So we shot it, not motion control, shot it slow pan, because I knew later I'd populate that down there with the roads, the people, the caravans, which will gradually, little by little, build up the idea and sense of density for Jerusalem. Because even with this kind of budget, you'd be amazed how limited you are. But I think that the sense and feeling of the density of the city is pretty good.
I was trying throughout the process to imagine what the effects shots would look like, and couldn't really quite get it. They did an awfully good job. There was always a team around shooting plates, they said, and I had no idea what a plate was. But apparently we've just seen what they did with them.
It's always a huge surprise to see what ends up on the screen, how different it is from what you imagined. It's obviously amazing what they can do with CGI today. What was amazing about this film was there was very little blue screen. I just don't remember there being any. So I don't know how they painted it in, really. I was constantly baffled at how everything looked better than I'd imagined it would look. When you read a script like this, you have an idea immediately, particularly with a script like Kingdom of Heaven, which was really full of imagery. So I had a very clear idea of how things would look, but when I saw the finished product, I was just amazed because it just surpassed all my expectations of how I thought it would look, From the makeup and the hair, the lighting, the wardrobe, the set decoration, the set design, the props. Each department on this film seemed to really understand what they were making.
This is an ABH, so this is very hilly. And ABH was a combination of ABH and the set. Everything behind him there doesn't exist. We put that in. Isn't that great? The town is amazing behind him. This is on the top of Ahbenadu. And I caught the landscape at the moment when the wind was high and was whipping through with the sunlight. So we shot the plate with Orlando standing there, knowing later I'd put another part of Jerusalem below. I think architecture is very difficult to do digitally. To do and make it look real, where you look at it and think, oh, what's wrong with this picture? It looks phony. But actually they did a pretty good job, I thought. It's a very tricky thing. And I think you can't paint it. You've got to get plates. You've got to photograph like a jigsaw puzzle. People say, well, yeah, I've seen people draw plates. And I think always you can go plate, spot the plate, always. If it's drawn, I think it's got to be plated then from other real things, maybe then readjusted, relit, and designed that way. These now you can photograph plates and literally piece them together, relight them, redirectionalize them, and shrink them, pop them up. You can do all kinds of things and really build up a picture. You can actually go into existing books, just take off the high resolution photographs, just go in there and take bits and bobs and make up this huge jigsaw puzzle. The ideal thing to do is go down there and have them literally photograph what you want and then reconform it into what would constitute Jerusalem, removing all the TV aerials and all the bad stuff. And it's always frustrating when you're doing these kind of films because whatever it is, you never have enough money. And you're always trying to say, yeah, but I want the feeling of the city to be much bigger. And I'd love to have shot in Jerusalem, which of course would have been impossible. Impossible. I couldn't have shot in Jerusalem. Absolutely no way.
In this bit, it would have been a little more helpful had we known that letters had been sent from Messina, or that the Hospitaller was already in Jerusalem, so that we'd know why Balian's men recognized him there. Kingdom of Heaven is probably the most accurate historical movie ever made in many, many ways, despite the fact of the liberties we took with Balian. And, some liberties in the siege of Jerusalem. And you almost always have to have a fictionalized protagonist. But most of the rest of the major figures in this film are who they were, doing what they did, and often saying what they did. Although, in one instance, lines of Raymond of Tripoli were given to Balian as the star of the picture. We had a little bit that didn't make it in, where he wakes up and there's a bowl of water beside the bed with rose petals floating on it, and it's for bathing, but he drinks it, and the servant girls laugh. It didn't make it into the picture, but I quite liked it.
So I'm moving from location to location to location. This is a courtyard in Palmas del Rios, which we now stick as the house of his father in Jerusalem. That place also, this Palmas del Rios, which we're looking at right now, also was the hospital where his father died. And so I used this palace in Spain to really great effect. It was really economically very sound to go there because we shot 3 major sequences in there, so it was really cool.
I thought Eva did such an amazing job in this film. I'm so glad that the real meat of her character's story, being the euthanasia of her son, is back in the film, because it was what really gave her character an arc and heart, and the pain of motherhood versus responsibility as a queen, and she did a really fantastic job, I felt.
There was a continual back and forth about this scene. Absolutely continual. Wanting Balian to say more, to be more aggressive with this woman. Wanting her to say more. And you just have to refer to your own life, where love happens, without a word being spoken. Give me a drink of water was good enough for me. I've dealt with less. Gone long distances. See, the trouble is that the female character in a major film is always supposed to be sort of a shoulder and an ear, some sort of tool that unlocks the psyche of the hero, who gets the hero to talk about himself. And, if I can change one thing in film, it will be that.
Again, the Hospitaller does this thing of saying what's really important in life is what's in your head and in your heart. There were so many themes that were like recurring, and that was a line that Balian says later to Sibylla. Jerusalem, it's here and it's here, i.e. he points to his head and his heart. It's not on paper, it's not physical. There were so many things that were fantastic about this script because they mirrored, there There was a real sense of continuity and follow-through because everything was linked.
David Thewlis' character was designed, who was the Hospitaller, who was a man who was a very curious combination of warrior, churchman, and had a sense of medicine, hence the word hospital or hospitality, which would be derivative later from probably Knights of the Templars, hospitals, hospitallers, medicine, knowledge, probably herbal, probably a knowledge of anatomy, setting bones, resetting bones, etc. But above all things, to me, Thewlis is the most modern man in the whole film because he is able to talk about his religion with a everyman's comfort, in the sense of he's not ever preaching. He can listen to somebody else say, I don't believe in God, or I think the possibility that God doesn't exist, and he actually smile and be amused by that, saying you don't have to hear the voice from heavens to tell you that God exists, and tells him fundamentally during the story a very simple but actually I thought very beautifully written message by Bill, which is talking about, be a good man on a daily basis, and from that moment on you're halfway to becoming Christian. So if Christianity is the fundamentals of doing the right thing and social order, which is, one can almost argue, is the basis why whoever invented the Ten Commandments was really about creating order at a time which would be absolute chaos. Reynald was the bad guy that we'll see with the red beard. He did have this giant property that still stands today, Carrack. Carrack has never been taken. It still stands now. Because we looked at it and thought, should I go? And I said, nah, because now you've got a whole town around it. But it's very much on a hill, on a rise. That's how we built that Carrack. We'll come to in a minute.
This was the first scene I'd written that I'd ever seen filmed, really. I sort of poked my head around the corner at the Alcazar in Seville, and all of a sudden I see Jeremy Irons in there saying lines I'd written. I almost had a stroke. Until then, I'd sort of stayed away from the set almost superstitiously.
These locations, I think Ridley had been to these locations before on a previous movie, 1492, and they were just the most fantastic locations you could imagine. They were all real. I mean, that whole place. It was in Spain again. We were in Seville, and it was a beautiful, beautiful palace. The detail was just exquisite. And once the set decorators got in there, you really felt like you were in the world.
The working title of Crusades was a misnomer. The film was never going to be about the Crusades, per se. It was the year 1187 that was fascinating, and the years before. The Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem had stood for almost 100 years. It was a uniquely interesting period. The Christians and the Muslims were in a state of relative equilibrium. They ate together, they hunted together. A Muslim would call someone a Frankish pig and then mention in the same paragraph that he kept a good table and could tell a good story. There were truces in place, and the settlers were, in some cases, several generations into living in the Holy Land. There was an element of the old guard who could give a crap for holy war at that point, and they saw infidels as human beings and simply wanted to live in the East. There was conflict, but there was also genuine civilized or fatalistic or pragmatic accommodation between the cultures, which incensed the hardliners, the newcomers who came down to crusade and found that the crusade was over, essentially. All the land had been taken. Tiberius is obviously based on Raymond of Tripoli. And people in Hollywood are not careful readers at all. And they were getting confused between the Reynalds and Raymonds and everybody else. So I decided to change Raymond of Tripoli to Tiberius, which was the name of one of his seats, or at least his wife's seat. But he was, at various times, regent of the kingdom.
We're now in another place. We're now in the King's Palace, and who very kindly, now I've used this courtyard, both courtyards now twice, separated by 12 years. I used it once with Gerard Depardieu, and then again, I knew these existed. I said, Arthur, you want Muslim in Spain? There it is. We couldn't find anything quite this finished and monumentally spectacular like this in Morocco. So this is all in Spain, these courtyards. That filigree back there is carved in stone. It almost looks like we're in India as well. It's so similar. You know, you got elements of same architecture as the Taj Mahal. Very similar. It's all these tiles and corridors and are all real. I mean, all this I love to portray as a way of life.
My preference here would have been to leave Sibylla sitting desolate after Guy had gone. But this was contrived to pull her back into it.
You know, here's this beautiful woman in orange and turquoise silk with jewels dripping from every part of her. And also, to a Catholic, she's extremely open and very seductive. He landed on his feet, really, didn't he? And I think that was another reason why they were very enchanted by this, what they call the Holy Land or the New Land. People coming down there, I think the weather was better, was less rough, therefore easier to live. Like somebody coming from Europe to live in LA, it's easier to live here. Weather makes life much simpler. And I think North Africa, even whilst you get tremendous heat, you'd still find in those times, I think, the orange groves, which were probably brought in by the Spanish, actually. Muslims would have tangerines and citrus, vineyards, a whole different level of sophistication. People dressed in silk and slippers and plumbing and beautiful architecture, beautiful women, seductive women. Of course it was attractive to those coming from a absolutely rigidly locked up, religiously dominated Northern Europe. It was like an escape.
It continues to amaze me all the time what people think of, what they think what the people in the Middle Ages must have been. Just religious automata who were never bathed. And I remember saying in a meeting, of course they bathed. People would always bathe when they had access to soap, to water, to lie in ashes, whatever, simply because it feels better when you're clean. There would be no people anywhere who would not be clean if it was not practical.
I think that the Muslims, this particular juncture, were quite, wise about health, surgery, disease, to be clean. A lot of Northern Europeans, would probably not bother washing, for a week in the winter because it's fucking freezing. But, these people practiced hygiene. I don't want to describe some of the northern castles and, what it must have been like, the practicalities and the impracticalities of living. But pretty rough in the winter months. It's like, yikes. As long as everything falls outside the wall, it doesn't matter. Ed said, he just said, hey, I love to, this film sounds great. It's one of those conversations, what have you got? I said, well, he got this king. He said, oh my God, the King Baldwin. I said, yeah, and he knew a little bit about it. I said, oh, that's really interesting. He really got into the idea of, wouldn't it be cool to actually have the mask and for no one to realize who he was? That's what reason why we don't have him credited. That was his request. He said, let him guess as to who it might be. Because Baldwin was one of the very attractive voices in the film from the Holy Roman Catholic viewpoint of a guy who at the same time was kind of very modern in his thinking. I think, certainly for the times we're talking about, in perspective of the times.
This is also extraordinarily important to the movie. The fact that Balian's talent is recognized immediately by Baldwin. So he's taken Balian's measure. Again, you cut this out and you run into the common blacksmith becomes defender of Jerusalem problem. And like I said, he's a 12th century provincial Michelangelo is what he is.
Baldwin had been encouraging any denomination to come to Jerusalem to function. Come and pray, come and settle, intermarry. This was very unpopular with certain Muslims and very unpopular with certain Christians. But both of them were letting it just sit, I guess in hope that it would become, the rule book. But it didn't, and it wouldn't, and it couldn't, because you've got factions always behind the throne, whatever that is. And Salahuddin was very forward-thinking in every way. And I think half the reality, of Saladin at this particular juncture was he probably didn't go to war because he thought, A, it's too expensive, B, why bother? Everyone seems to be living fairly peacefully. I think that's why Bill cleverly designed the pressures of and around Salahuddin, which would be voiced in the person that I described as the mullah, which would be a cleric, intellectual, very strong, powerful supporter of making sure that whoever the leader was, he did the right thing by presenting the Muslims in the way that he felt they should be presented. And that would be very much by the book. Smart, absolutely. Passionate, absolutely. Fundamentalist, yeah, in the same way as fundamentalist Christian. Doesn't mean you have to go out and kill people in the name of the Bible, right? That's where the problem lies. You have people killing artificially in the name of the Bible, the same thing as the Muslims kill in the name of the Quran, and that's actually against the book. It's against both books. Thou shalt not kill. And yet it contradicts itself, talking an eye for an eye, doesn't it? All this is in here, That's why I think very much so it should have been pushed more political, but the danger is that people will switch off, but I don't think so. I think there is a very connective tissue today with what's happening. There is such a large faction of the Muslim community that now people are very aware of the fact that are getting as much pressure and damage as we are.
We put this in. As I am, you will be. I didn't quite catch the Latin itself, but the dance of death, very important to the whole thing, very important to the way Balian thinks, very important to the way a Catholic thinks. A Catholic such as myself is still essentially a medieval man under anything else I have over that, I always come back to the basics.
We built this manor house. You stand there with a couple of poles and say, right, I'm going to walk out and lean on this rail at a certain time because I like that house in the background. So we put this house, this structure with its own courtyards and everything, right in here, so we have to give him a very nice viewpoint out, and we place him right next to another Casbah.
I love this section of the movie where Balian sort of does what he's good at. He starts to work the land, He uses his mind as an engineer, as a artificer. He just gets this land moving into working to get the water filtration system working. It's great. I was eating an orange in this sequence because there was a scene earlier, which actually isn't in the long version either, where my father, Liam Neeson's character, gives me a piece of orange. And he says, taste that, because I had never tasted it before. And he said, that's the East. So in that scene, I was walking through the land of Evelyn with an orange. It was cool.
I think this particular community we were shooting in right here, it's a palmiery, date palms. So you've got a valley which is serviced by rivers and rain, flooding. And then this was probably a direct trade route Well, you'd be coming down through the Atlas. So these would be trade routes originally, probably silk, incense, herbs, spices, perfume. So all those trade routes would bring everything.
Now, this whole sequence has been much misunderstood because if you don't realize that Balian's an engineer and that his primary point here is engineering an irrigation system, you'd think that he was walking in being the first man in Middle Eastern history to think of digging for water, which is certainly not the case. It's all about irrigation.
I had a great time working with Ridley. It was very intimidating. It was my first major lead role, and he just was a voice of calm and reason and a touchstone in amongst all this chaos. And the direction he gave me was very succinct. I felt like I had a really good understanding of the character, and what he gave me was just pointers. We had 2 weeks of rehearsal. It was really 2 weeks of working on the script and talking about the characters and just working through it, but he really inspires people to work to the best of their ability, and that was very apparent in the crew and all the cast. I think everybody raised their game to try and meet the project, and he was just an amazing man to work for as an actor. I've always admired him, and it was a fantastic process. He's got such integrity as a director, and it really inspires you to step up to the plate.
Everything about being on location in this film was absolutely mind-blowing for me. You have to remember, this was the first picture I worked on. It's a hell of a start.
One of the things I found most interesting when I was doing 4092 with a guy called Jody Saval, who was playing me some original Spanish music, ancient, early, pre-guitar, and so you get a lot of that. And that, which is a bit, they didn't have instruments, so they would develop it out of that, and then the voice. And but what started to leak into a lot of his music was a sitar. So I said, wow, this music sounds Indian. He said, yeah. He said, it comes from overland. These music would travel with the caravans. They could split up factions, split up, go north of Mediterranean or south of Mediterranean. And so leaving their information along route. Logical.
Arthur's sets were always fantastic. You'd walk in and they were not only beautiful enough to imagine living in now, but, they were historically right on the money. It's pretty consistent for Balian not letting the servants do anything for him. Of course, it's great to see this come back in. Ava did such a wonderful job, absolutely wonderful job in this film. To see all this missing from the theatrical version was tragic. I feel worse for the actors than I do for myself. I at least know I wrote it and it was there, and done, and shot. But, the actors have what there is on screen.
So you've got a man here who actually has impressed the woman who's obviously very unhappy in her relationship with Guy. But does she set out to seduce Balian? Maybe. Is that historically correct? No. But she was on the throne alongside Guy at this moment. Balian was a man who was quite wealthy inside Jerusalem at this particular juncture. Was she happy with Guy? Obviously not, because her brother said to her, your husband is not suitable to take the chair when I die. Find another man, tell me who it is, and we will organize a divorce nisi through the Pope in London, and he can bugger off. Tell me who this man should be. She said, I can't find anyone. I will let you know at the time of my coronation. I will announce him after the crown is put on my head. That tells me that she obviously was thinking about somebody, right? Obviously that person turned her down because her brother had given her open house to say, look, make a decision, choose the guy you want, because I'm going to die soon, and I will make sure it all goes through. with that open mind, I think she'd have tried. So that's where Bill took that and thought, I could arrange the encounter with Balian as the man who she may have been conducting an affair with, who then she offers him the world and he turns it down. So that's the only time that Bill looked into the facts historically and actually then decided to noodle with the facts and do what he did here, which I think is pretty good. So we didn't go much off track here.
It was extraordinary to show up on these. You write peasants are using adzes to make troughs out of palm logs, and then you show up and you actually see it being done. It's interesting.
People say, well, he's a blacksmith. But actually somebody who actually can take metal, bend it round, and in the church we'd have him making not sword blades, but brackets. Do you notice the brackets? So he's banging and shaping metal, which aren't, so everybody assumes it's a sword, because that's the way we are. They're brackets. If you watch what he throws on the ground, they're actually brackets. Those brackets are for architecture. That's so the priest, the bishop says, I need him to finish my church. So he's building architectural brackets to support beams so that he can actually do church extensions. So that means this guy is very inventive because he's a craftsman, artisan, maybe you might argue. And so that's why I thought, well, let's have, it's not a new idea, but let's have somebody who comes in, sees that his father didn't know or didn't care, says I can turn this into something. The idea of digging down far enough in a lot of these desert locations, you'll find water. You get torrential rains in January, February. It's absorbed and goes underground, if you know where to look.
This is important because, it shows the king has asked Balian to consider the fortifications of Jerusalem. And here he is working at his desk, drawing, writing, a literate man and an artist. Not Longfellow's blacksmith under his tree. And this next bit refers again to the liberating aspect of the kingdom that was formed down there, the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem. Between one person and another, there is only light, rather than a bunch of social strictures and prohibitions.
I'll do a love scene, it's a really horny love scene, when it's justified. It's not I don't like him. I like sex, don't worry about it. But in this instance, not really justified. So I think I feel for the actors as well, because they're both very uncomfortable having to do it. It's tricky. It's very tricky. Love scenes are brave. That's tricky stuff. And then at the end say cut and separate, and they usually laugh, and that's, that kind of thing. That is really hard to do. And I didn't want to go into that here. And they didn't either. I feel it out. It's like the day saying, do they want to go there? Do they not want to go there? And then you keep it fairly open, because once they hit the sack, it's whatever you want. But I find for the most part, when I watch a film, it becomes uncomfortable. Where it's after about 30 seconds, okay, let's get on with the story. Unless that's what it's about, where there's a point to it.
The thing about sex scenes in film, I think Ridley has said somewhere that, or perhaps he just said it to me, is that sex is mainly interesting when you're doing it. So, to which I'd add the qualification, sometimes not even then. So it's the heaving backs in the half-lit room are more or less by this point, a convention of cinema. There are ways to be much, much sexier than showing a sex scene. The historical Reynald, his castle of Kerak, overlooked the main caravan routes, which was very convenient for him. And He operated pretty much independently. He raided who he liked, when he liked. He actually tried to raid Mecca by sea, which was a piece of extreme enterprise, which failed.
These are violent times, and I think, frankly, the view to that when we're watching so much violence, I mean, it's the old story, watching so much violence on TV, and our kids can flick over in 2 seconds to a sex channel is like bizarre that they're concerned about that today, particularly when it's built within a historical context, which these times were particularly violent. It's very much part of the way of life in these times, and I think it's kind of silly. It's not like I'm seeing someone roasted alive on a spit, or a sword blow is a sword blow. One of those swords will cut you from top of your head to sternum in a blow, where you see the lungs still going. And that's what it was about. It's like terrifying. These people must have been very strong, fundamentally very strong, because they're carrying around major weight and armor. I think they must have been shorter and stockier, but they must have been strong, very strong. I mean, to keep a sword fight going for a minute is shockingly difficult. It's like boxing. Just a boxer who's dancing around his feet for 3 minutes is like a killer. A guy who's got a sword that may weigh 9 pounds, maybe heavier, and he's waving that around even two-handed. For a minute, you'd be dying. Whereas that, everything developed later on to the lightweight sword, which is the rapier. The rapier was quite heavy, but then the epee was very light, which is a real dueling sword. We cheated here about 50 years early on the longsword. It developed into a longsword, which was basically a two-hander. I mean, that was like the Big Bertha. That was like the big gun. You could just bring that down. That would just cut through everything. But you get a one-shot blow. If you missed, you're in real trouble.
One element of this film that still amazes me today is how fantastic a job Janty Yates did with the costumes. She really knew exactly what Ridley was looking for, and she really knew exactly how to make it real. I remember working with her really early on, and I was really conscious of being much bigger in this film, physically bigger. I was doing a lot of training with a personal trainer to get bigger and stronger and have the stamina not only just for the filming schedule, but obviously for the role. And Janty was such a support because, I got bigger as the film went on, but to begin with, I wasn't as big as I'd wanted to be. And she gave me all these layers and all these different dimensions in terms of the costume. And it was a real collaboration. And I felt like she really knew who this man was and who I was and what I was looking for. So when I saw it all together with the chainmail and everything else, I was very impressed.
All the wardrobe in this I thought was absolutely fantastic. We had a lot of problems trying to get the blue right of the robes of Jerusalem. Kind of an Air Force blue, thick and heavy, I would imagine, wool.
What's coming up I somewhat disagree with. The king sort of bends over and says, "Tell Balian to protect the villagers." What would have been better is if Balian comes across, sees the villagers imperiled, and decides autonomously to sacrifice himself. Because, it works both ways. But a man deciding something is better than a man receiving orders to do something.
Beautiful mask. Which in this instance, he's got this godlike mask. Etruscan. Look at some Etruscan masks for his face, which of course is hiding what's really underneath. At the age of 15, somebody spotted that he felt no pain. And Salahuddin sent in his doctor that was Jewish to come and look at the boy, king, the boy that would be king, and say, yes, he's got a particularly virulent form of leprosy. It'll be particularly aggressive, and it's quick. But the man still lived 10 years. So he must have had to put on the mask pretty soon, like within 2 or 3 years. And eventually he was still conducting his own battleground, and having to be tied in the saddle, and would literally have the reins tied to a hand and have the sword tied to him. So when he went into Kerak, the king must have been carried there, then put on horseback, tied on horseback, so he could actually meet with Salahuddin.
This was interesting. I think we ran into a problem with cutting the first draft. We decided we weren't going to have the Siege of Kerak in, which I'd written in a fantastically detailed way. So we needed something else. So what I did was, I thought about it and thought, okay, we'll do a cavalry charge. And still have the villagers trying to get into the castle of Kerak before the Saracens come. This charge is actually based on a famous charge at the Springs of Cresson, where a mixed party of knights of the religious orders charged an overwhelming force of Muslims, and most of them were killed. Gerard de Roudefort managed to, as usual, survive, but it is sort of fact-based, and it was not unusual for Western knights to attack enormous numbers of Saracens, sometimes successfully.
This charge is based on the historical fact of 10 to 1. The rumor was that 10 to 1, one guy on a European charger with armor would be the equivalent of about 10 Muslims. I don't really believe that, but it was written. And it's based on a charge that they did. It was 40 against 400. And the 40 came out on top and set the rest running. Because don't forget, the Arabs were all mostly soft armor. It was only the elegance and design of Saladin's army that he started getting into the helmet, the shield, the protection on the arms for the sword blows, the chainmail. This is all prior to hard armor, which was kind of a problem at first. I thought, oh shit, can't I cheat? And he said, no, you're 100 years out.
The Western knights tended to ride stallions, and the Saracens favored mares for lightness and quickness, but it also made for some interesting horse encounters on the battlefields.
I loved this sequence at Kerak. I loved to ride, but it was so exhilarating riding with 200 horses charging over the deserts of Morocco. I'd done a fair amount of riding for films prior to this, so I was quite confident on a horse. But we did a few sessions on horseback with the shields and swords and those spears and everything that those guys are carrying, the flag poles. They're really heavy, really cumbersome, really awkward. There was maybe 80 horses on my side and then 100 or so on the other, opposite us. And there were big gaps between the horses, so that when we charged through, you would charge into your gap between the opposite side's horse. It was kind of terrifying, but really, really amazing as well. You have to have a good horse to know that you can do that sort of thing. I remember I was holding my shield, and it was really difficult to get a good grip of the reins. So I had basically one hand on the reins with my shield in my hands and one hand on my sword, and I was cantering along, and I was like just holding on for kind of dear life, really. There wasn't a lot to hold on to in terms of the reins because I had the shield as well. It was kind of an awkward setup. But I had a very good relationship with my horse. Had a few words with him prior to the shot.
The Battle of Kerak, which this is, was actual. And what happened was part of the Jerusalem army came in to try and dissuade Salahuddin from taking Kerak. Kerak has never been taken before in history. Kerak, as the castle, still stands today and was impregnable. And we'll see what happens during this, which is a shorter version of what happened historically, because I didn't want to have one battle almost as long as the Battle of Jerusalem, which will come up at the end of the film, because I think large battles are limited editions, ought to be limited editions. because what happens is you just get exhausted with violence and blood, and you kind of want to move on in the story. So this is more symbolic of what happened then, with, of course, the highlight is the arrival of Salahuddin. What we did here is we designed the advance guard of Saladin's army that would be the cavalry going there ahead to clear the field or to scout out the field, and in so doing was met by Balian and his small group of crusaders or knights.
You know, I would have liked to have seen Reynald shutting the gates of Karak against the refugees, making Balian's charge more obviously necessary, but as you can tell, the timing doesn't work out to include that, and doesn't need it.
And I also thought this is a very nice thing where Bill plays the same beat that was in the first act, where there's a sword by his face, and Balian looks up to see that we now realize that Alexander, or this man, Imad, was not, in fact, a servant, but in fact was an important person in the Muslim army. I think at first we think that this man, in fact, may be Saladin, but in fact he's not. He's only an officer of Saladin. So the pecking order gets higher and higher. The representation of the armor here is pretty accurate. What they wore, they were already wearing breastplates and chainmail. Probably made better chainmail than the Northern Europeans, because just the craftsmanship was probably finer. Even in those days, probably got cheaper suits of armor made elsewhere, as opposed to homegrown. And then we have the arrival of the army of Jerusalem. He says, tell them my master Jerusalem has come. So that's when we realize that he has a master, an overlord. The army of Jerusalem always traveled with a very large cross on some kind of vehicle, which would be a wagon. The cross we understood to be, some say 10 meters. That's a big cross. And the idea, probably, at those particular, who knows, but those particular times would be the idea, would be the symbol of Christ, but actually, those might argue it was actually the cross of Christ, but I really doubt it. And this particular cross was bejeweled and gaudy, apparently, by description. Quite gaudy, gold leaf jeweled, and you could see it coming at a distance. So that's what we did, was we kind of made up the appearance of gold leaf and jewels. Probably for those days, probably almost like fairground color, and but that's all real. That's all these details are real. When you see back through the engravings of those who've attempted the Crusades over the years, paintings and engravings, the earlier stuff in the engravings, you will find this cross.
None of the sources of the time can agree what the cross looked like. Well, I mean, it wasn't the cross itself. It was sort of a reliquary with a piece of the cross inside it. I was kind of stunned when I saw it so large, but I imagine it would be. I think Arthur had done his research. You know, if it's written as a reliquary, it could have been, you know, sort of a lighter cross with some sort of bit in it that could hold it. I remember this day very well. In Morocco, there weren't that many guys there.
You'll see the best of the crowd stuff in the Battle of Jerusalem, which is really amazing. Technology is getting better, and I can look into that saying, I don't like what that guy's doing. And so can this crowd here be doing different things rather than repetition of something you've got in your computer? And when you get to the Battle of Jerusalem, you'll see crowds of 70,000, 80,000, 150,000.
Now, what really happened here was that Saladin was already engaged in a great siege of Karak, where there was a wedding in progress. Famously, he made a deal not to fire his artillery at the tower where the wedding couple were spending the night. But we chopped that out as not necessary, as we did later with the Battle of Hattin as not necessary.
This is, in fact, within the set of Jerusalem, except you don't know, because around the back. But if you look carefully through, you see the back set of Jerusalem up there. And actually seen through the arches through there's more of Jerusalem. So that's the main gate of Jerusalem through those arches. I just built this on the plain right outside the studio, which worked out really well, very practical. So when I look at, from one direction, I'm looking at Jerusalem. If I go around the back, I've built Kerak, but I'm able to use both because they're both together, where I can see architecture off and in perspective beyond. And actually, I'm looking at Kerak. And I don't know that. I just think it's more Jerusalem. And conversely, when I'm in Kerak, looking back at bits and pieces of architecture popping over, through, and behind, looking at Jerusalem, and I don't know. People have found it very literal, and they can't think that way. They go, well, that's Jerusalem. I say, yeah, but I'm looking at it from here, and you don't know, do you? Oh, yeah. But you will know. I said, no, you won't, you know. And Arthur's really good at that. I said, think about this expensive set here. How do I use it 4 times? How do I use it 3 times? And he goes, okay, let me think about it, you know.
There was graffiti on the walls. Graffiti that you would imagine from the period, you know, like they had a horse and a knight and a rider just scratched on with chalk and stuff. I mean, the attention to detail was unbelievable. Arthur Max really took it to the nth degree. And I mean, even the paint, the color of the brickwork, the color of the stone, it looks so unbelievably real. You never question that that would be a set. At least I never did.
One of the hardest things is actually gauging the light at this particular time of year, because we're now leaking into May and June. So it's getting pretty hot and pretty windy and pretty everything. Dusty and a lot of top light, which can be very ugly, but I guess we're getting really good at it now. I mean, I can stand there now and just look around thinking, right, I've got to shoot this at 9 o'clock in the morning, I've got to be on this by 11. And then at midday, I've got to get inside or put my actors where I can position. To me, a beautiful picture is always the balance of light and shadow. I mean, as well as what you've lined up your lens on, but a great organization of images can be ruined by bad light, and something which is more mediocre can be made enhanced by great light. So you got to know what you're looking at, and then the best time to shoot it. Best cameramen tend to get the image they want in the camera. And then later there's a bit of enhancement digitally. But when you're working in difficult conditions like this, like we wanted to have behind Salahuddin, the ground blowing out to suggest the heat, because inside the tent outside is definitely 8 stops, maybe more. Something's got to give. So you're going to expose for the inside to see his face. The outside will literally completely cream out, blow out. So you've got to give the emulsion a break and give it a bite so you can capture a teeny bit of information outside. So then the digital technology can hook into that and enhance it. If you've got something there, you can enhance it. If you've got nothing there, there's nothing you can do. And, you know, when you're getting such outrageous differential in terms of front and back light and sun and shadow, where you're getting maybe 8 stop difference, that means then John's got to come in and fill to raise the level, so the tolerance may only be 3 stop difference, or to be really dramatic, a 4 stop difference. Now, you can actually adjust it as he moves by opening up the stop physically on the camera. When you do that, you'll suddenly see this slight movement of everything getting brighter. What we can now do with the digital world, I can just do that digitally afterwards, seamlessly. And you didn't even notice. And what was otherwise deep, deep shadow, because what I like is all the information in the deep, harsh sunlight, so I'll have to be able to stop down. If I pan from that into the shadow, just go black, unless I can find a way of getting in there. And digitally, you can hack in and get it and dig it out. You say, well, I want to see the outside, in which case this tent's going to have to be tremendously filled. Or you don't shoot it at high noon. You shoot it at the end of the day when the sun's gone. So now you're right at the edge of the stop, and your outside, inside stop maybe only 4 points. It's a lot. And you get, because the sun's dropping like a stone, you've got far less time to actually do the scene.
I thought that turban looked really funny when I saw it in the film. And I talked about it with Janti, because we'd sort of adapted what he was wearing to his location. And we thought, well, you know, people around him were wearing those turbans, and he probably would have thought, well, it's probably a good idea, you know. If it works for them, it'll work for me. It certainly kept the sand out of your ears.
This is at the Alcazar, and Martin was practicing this continually in the hotel. Brendan does a great job. The original of Reynald, when we had the Siege of Caracan, I had incredible fun writing him. I mean, he was up there with Falstaff in the original. It was great. Yeah, he still is. But in the original, as he was giving wedding advice to Humphrey of Turan, was priceless. Drinking wine as somebody's head was smashed in by a stone flung by the Saracens.
This guy here, John Finch, was in the first shot of the first day of the first setup on Alien. And he was to play the part of the gentleman who would later give birth to an alien on the kitchen table. And John at the time was diabetic, and I think we did like 12 takes, and then I went over and said, "Do you feel okay?" He said, "No, I feel terrible." And I still remember it. And the next thing is we have to lift him out of the chair and take him home. Because he was, I don't know, diabetics leaves you very weak, doesn't it? But he seemed to have fully recovered. And that was the last I saw him for 23 years. And that night, John Hurt took over and was an alien. So I saw John I just saw his picture. And I was casting this and thought, good heavens. So I brought him in, and there it was. He did good. He did great.
John Finch's character, of course, is Heraclius, Patriarch of Jerusalem. Again, we were accused of being anti-clerical by presenting Heraclius exactly as he was. Sort of a conniving man. Granted, William of Tyre is supposed to have been his rival and been prejudiced against Heraclius when he was writing his account, but the Saracen accounts all agree too. Under the terms of surrender, everyone could leave, but, you couldn't take church plate, for example. Heraclius was detected at the gates of Jerusalem with pieces of gold falling out from under his robe.
We've added this as well. This is new. We see her still conducting her own affair. I like all this additional characterization for her. I mean, for her it's essential, because you see that she's not really an evil woman. She's, first of all, is enchanted with him or in love with him. And what we're about to come to is the death of her brother, which they believe the trip to Kerak virtually killed her brother. He actually personally flogged Renaud like that. And that took its toll. And getting back to Jerusalem, I think, took its toll. So he was awfully close to death at this particular point. But now you have the beginning of mistrust, and he wonders whether he's being manipulated. And I think also the idea of a commoner, which he is, very much so, a working class man, involving with royalty is probably always a bad mix. He doesn't get the overall picture, and she has to get the overall picture. That's why at the end she says, I'm still the Queen of Tripoli, and various other places, and he very simply says, well, decide not to be a queen, and I'll come to you. But she gives up a lot for that. This is only her second film, I think, and I think she was really a really great choice, because she's so, apart from being a really good actress with great intelligent intuition, she's also very exotic, and yet there's something modern about her. Both she and her brother would have been born in North Africa, in Jerusalem. They would never have seen France.
The boy was, he was sickly. There's no evidence that he had leprosy, but it's interesting if he did, dramatically. So it allowed me to have a mother euthanizing her son, which is certainly a dramatically interesting situation.
So now we have the king making his bed that he's about to lie in. He's politically offering not exactly the throne to Orlando, to Balian, but he's actually saying, marry my sister, and being offered the world here. And I think, again, Bill Monahan's saying to the king, didn't you once say that a man may be owned in every way except for his soul? Which I always thought was a great idea. And he says, you have my answer. And I think what comes out of it is the king respects that. So be it. Now the story is beginning to enter into absolute history, because this man Balian did take over and was the chosen one to actually defend Jerusalem against the Muslims.
In this version of the movie, I think it will hopefully be clearer why Balian does what he does, because one thing that I think you notice in the film, the theatrical releases, you see a man who, if he would just marry Sibylla, the woman he wants to marry, then there would be no more bloodshed. But you see, Balian is a knight, and he is a good man, and it goes against everything within his being to be the cause of another man's death for his own personal gain. It was a real moral dilemma for this man, and I think there was something so ominous about this scene when we shot it, with Jeremy Irons playing Tiberius saying, "Whatever you ask, I will serve." You know, there was a real sense of Balian being pushed into playing a political role, and he had no intention of being a man of politics. His job, in his mind, was quite simple. His father had made him a knight. He should serve the king, and if the king were to die, he would protect the people. So, in a sense, that was the line that he drew for himself, that he would not cross. I loved that about the character, the sort of rigidness of him. But at the same time, when you saw the movie put together, I remember thinking, wow, if he'd only have married the girl and killed his nemesis, everything would have been fine. But of course, it's not the way life turns out often. And we wouldn't have had the movie either.
Now, now we're in this longer version. The full extent of the value of this version is really coming into play, where you're now realizing the real true predicament of this woman, Sibylla, with her husband, this man who will be king, and then what will become worse. Well, he won't be king yet. Her son will be king first. That's what's interesting about this. That was the actual historical series of events. The boy was coronated 10 months later. He contracted a disease. Historically, they call it a disease. Some say it was rumored that he had got the same disease as his uncle, genetically. So he had got leprosy. Some say then that the mother murdered the son, or had the son murdered, for power reason. That doesn't make sense, because if he's got leprosy, she knows it's only a matter of time. And besides, if she had wanted the crown that much, she could have organized a riding accident or some, more believable accident earlier, even to her son, if she was that evil. For her now to wait till the boy's crowned, then wait 10 months to decide to have him murdered doesn't make any sense at all. So what I think makes sense is the mother's love for the son and the mother's love for her brother, seeing what he went through. You're looking at the possibility of euthanasia for that reason. And that's the way we played it, because that to me made sense. I think when you look at historical detail and historical fact, historians always get stuck with the facts. And I said, well, that's my argument always with the so-called history buff. I said, well, you can't or won't or are unable to give me what your reading is of the situation. I'm a dramatist, so I have to give you a reading of the situation. And looking logically and humanely at everything, and the fact that the mother, it is a mother with a son, I think you're probably looking at euthanasia. That's why the scene there is written where she says to Jeremy Irons, and who will decide when to put on the mask? Will you have the mask? Will you tell him? And so we then played around with this and the idea of the kid playing with fire. I think the kid knows he feels no pain. So he's curious and he does that, and there's still no pain, even though there's a blister. I thought that was a really interesting way of going about it. The best experiences I've had with writers, they nearly always come up with a problem or say, what do you want to do? Because this history says this and this. What do you think? And I'll think about it and we'll discuss it. Simple as that. And to me, it made sense that a mother would probably put her son down. Someone would say, I couldn't, I'd still keep him alive as long as I could. But that's a very difficult argument, isn't it? Which is right. Because the misery is inevitable, isn't it? It has to be. So is it then become the selfishness of the parent to say no when they should have said just yes, and that's the end of it? And I agree with that as well. I mean, it's whatever feel you have to do, you have to do. The reason why we took it out was not because of its unpleasant nature, or because it's not. It's all very beautifully dealt with and done. She does it beautifully. It was the real juice of her part, and it was hard for me because it was even harder for her to take. So I was always very sorry about that. And but you know, the question is the story directly relevant to the overview and the overall story, or do we suddenly stop and go off at a tangent for 15 minutes to deal with this other story? And you can argue that, but then sometimes density is the best. I find density really is almost essential. I mean, rather than just the simplistic approach to anything. You know, our job is to entertain, and our job is to tell novels or books, stories on film with pictures. And I would have thought density is a very good thing. So, I don't know. At the end of the day, I don't really agree with it, no. But I'm hoping this will at least appease to a certain extent when she sees this, because the digital stuff in this is really fantastic.
Originally, this palace stuff was quite a sell with Ridley, because we sort of agreed we didn't want courtiers swanning around the place. We wanted to be kind of a down and dirty Crusades bit. But the fact is, once you're committed to King Baldwin, you're committed to a certain amount of court drama. And if Balian's your hero, and if you're dealing with the period, there's no other possible hero but Balian, you know, you're going to have a certain amount of court drama. So here it is. And with this result, was it anything to be afraid of? I don't think so. All right, the real seed of the film, for me, is something my father quoted to me when he was dying. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his immortal soul? And if you're looking at the film with that in mind, you can probably figure out what it's about, you know? My dad was on morphine. He's a skull on a pillow, and that was what was on his mind. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world? It's what he believed his whole life, and I realized that I believed the same thing. And when Ridley learned that was what was driving my train emotionally, and the script thematically, he put it on the front of the script. Later it was on the back of the crew T-shirts in Morocco. I thought, you know, there you go. Here I am standing on the set of a $100+ million film, which in some way is to some degree about my personal upbringing.
That was hard, as choosing how bad is bad. And because of his form of leprosy, and it's 10 years on now, it's probably really rampant. And actually, it was probably worse than that. Because what it would do would go for the center of the face. Because the center of the face is basically a cavity. The nose would disappear into the upper vault of the mouth. So eventually you just have a hole in the middle of your face. It's pretty unspeakable. And the voice would have been definitely shrieking like this. But the problem is that the words are kind of beautiful. So when you right. So the problem is you start to lose the context of what he's saying. Or you're having to concentrate so hard that you're starting to lose the magic of what's going on. So we did it straight, took her out and did it straight. But he would have definitely been a contorted voice, and definitely with his disfigurement, the breathing would have been different.
Someone asked me the other day, he said, were you raised Catholic? It was sort of an interview, and I said, well, the titles of my first two films are Kingdom of Heaven and The Departed. What do you think? You know, being functionally irreligious now makes no difference to the quality of a sort of Catholic upbringing. And it's funny, a Catholic in the old days could have had an 8th grade education. But when it came to questions of logic or ethics, one of the virtues of the church was that you could think things out. I've heard perfectly Socratic logic from a school janitor.
The fire at the very beginning works, bang, and then there's another explosion. It's almost like David Thewlis having fun with him, because he turns and looks back and he's gone. And this relates to his earlier scene where he says, I haven't heard that. And actually, I was trying to play him off as a little more mystical. It's a great scene that didn't end up in the movie, and really is a scene of question about logic, about religion, God, no God. God does not speak to me. And on the day, the horse did this. That horse did that by himself. No one did that. And I thought, oh, that's cool. So maybe the horse got a fright because he'd just seen a spirit, which I thought was fun. It was partly the reason the horse did that I decided to do that. He probably got stung by a hornet.
The director will resume commentary shortly. This audio is brought to you by Cine and Science YouTube channel.
And then this idea of carrying on the notion of no pain and the wax, I thought was a pretty neat way of drawing us into clerical work for the king, signing of charters and documents. He would have yelped when that happened. So once you get the idea, the actual unraveling of how would a doctor deal with it is pretty straightforward. And you'd prick the foot, so that's very graphic. So then you see the ooze, the liquid. But the point is the boy feels no pain, even though he's being distracted by the puppeteer. So this is a confirmation that he certainly probably has leprosy. And this scene had to come out because we had everything else out. So that organically there's quite a lot missing. I think she'll be very happy when she sees this go back in. I think people can sit there and really watch this, extended versions of this stuff, because it is so interesting.
It was fantastic to meet Jeremy, who's always been one of my heroes. And it was extraordinary to be in the hotel. We're in the hotel in Seville. And, I almost had a hallucinatory experience. I said, Jeremy, could I get you a drink? And he looks up, and obviously being Jeremy Irons, says, Cointreau. And you sort of think, all right, I'm heading to the bar to get a Cointreau for Jeremy Irons. How things change. Again, in the amazing what people don't know department, they assume that people in the Middle Ages were a kind of church-controlled robot, and of course they weren't. The thing you have to remember about people in the past is they're us, and you'd have people saying, to do not believe in God would be viewed as madness, or to not accept the clergy would be unthinkable in these times. But of course it's not true at all. I mean, Boccaccio's not much later. I mean, not to mention Chaucer. We're not too much earlier.
Guy de Lusignan was married to Sibylla. Sibylla was the sister of Baldwin IV, the king. Baldwin IV had leprosy and did wear a mask, and Baldwin IV did die, leaving the throne to the child, who was the offspring not of Guy, but the husband prior to Guy had given child to Sibylla at 14, then within 10 months of the birth it had died, and then Sibylla's mother had felt it absolutely necessary that she must nominate a person because her daughter must have a man in her life. And so Guy de Lusignan was basically given to her, or she was basically given to Guy de Lusignan, because Guy de Lusignan was quite powerful, quite wealthy, and was one of the forces in Jerusalem at the time. So that's how that came together.
This is one of my favourite scenes in the movie. It's a real ode to Sergio Leone. And I remember when we shot it, it just felt like that. This was a rubber rock. I had this big rubber rock, and I was literally just pummeling this guy. The stunt guy under the helmet said, "Don't worry, I won't feel a thing. It's a rubber rock, and I got this helmet on anyway." So I was literally smashing his face with this rock. I love the viciousness of this fight. Real Ridley stuff, you know, real violent and messy. We rehearsed this for quite some time just to get the moves right. The stunt guys and swordsmen were fantastic on this. They just really just got on with it, you know. It was like, this is what we're doing, let's do it, let's get it done. And thankfully nobody got hurt, but they were really just very hands-on.
The fight pretty much was scripted. I had a pretty good rapport with the sword master and the fight guys and stuff like that, and they did me a really great compliment, saying that, you know, sometimes I'd work through a fight in various different ways, and then they'd go back to the script because, you know, owing to an interesting youth, violence isn't exactly foreign to me, and if you know a little bit about the physics of violence, you can, you know, go a long way with it.
And I think what we got out of the 2-hour, 23-minute version is good. But I think all of this now makes sense when you have all this, the yarn fully explored. The problem is that we tend to be driven by simplicity and simplistic approach to narrative, don't we? Now. Not now, always. When you look back and look at old movies, they're very simplistic. Except for the really great ones. And that's why people like suddenly Orson Welles stopped me in my tracks and went, why is this different? Seriously, you know. For the most part, it's always been for the larger audience, hasn't it? You look at a very early film, and it doesn't matter how good it is, you're allowing a lot for some of the naivety that chugs along and slips by. That's why the best ones come through. Some great films, Wells always. I mean, I'm talking about in the Hollywood culture, the complexity, the reality of the characterizations, not pulling punches. The taking of Salahuddin's sister wasn't by accident, that was by design. Because it was Renaud who had obviously chosen the caravan. He knew who was in the caravan. He could find out in 2 seconds who was in the caravan. And he took that, and she was taken. No one really knows what happened to her. She was taken, some say 4 months later she was released, and God knows what happened. Or maybe nothing happened because she was a relative of such a powerful man that no one would dare do anything. Or the other story is that she never returned. And that seemed to just pull the plug for Salahuddin. So in a simplified version, because obviously there are all kinds of other movements and reasons, but he had to move in, he had to now go for it. Or he chose to go for it at this point, thinking, I can't fend this off any longer. Like all great leaders, though, he knows what it's going to cost. He knows it's going to be the cost of his men. And he has to think about that very carefully before he decides what to do. That's why he's a great leader. So that's what they did. That's what he did. And that's what he did and Salahuddin did. So basically bring me the head of the person.
People asked kind of perpetually if 9/11 had anything to do with this film. If Kingdom of Heaven had been conceived 20 or 200 years from now by the same guys, it would have been the same thing. It would have made no fundamental difference to it as a work of art. And anyone who actually pays attention to the film will probably see that. It's pretty sovereign, you know. It wasn't made by its era. It was made by Ridley Scott and me. This film is about chivalry. It's about right action. It's kind of timeless, but we don't see much of it in our own time. I believe through that I was behind the pillar to Martin's right. Now, the stuff that's coming up, a lot of the lines that are given to Balian here were actually said by Tiberius, Raymond of Tripoli. He was the one who gave the advice not to march because of the heat of the season and the absence of water. And, you know, it was foolish. You know, it's really one of the noblest speeches of the period. It was his land that Saladin was heading for. His wife was besieged by Saladin's army, and still he advised the army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem to stay where it was. Again, as I said, these were Tiberius's lines, but they tend to shift to the hero.
This is more or less what happened where Guy de Lusignan was kind of warned, do not go out in the desert, do not try to attack him on his own ground, you will not win. And it's the wrong time of the year, you've got no backup. Using the same rule book that Saladin would take when he ever went into the desert, he would always be prepared. And they didn't, they ignored it and went out, and there was the biggest single massacre. Hattin, which follows here, is the biggest single massacre ever by a Muslim army on a Christian army. I believe, why do I think there's numbers in excess of 70,000 dead? That's a lot of people in one place, in a valley of Hattin, with 20,000 vultures all having a good time. It's shocking.
This day was extraordinary. Very windy. I wonder sometimes if the knights would be marching in close order like that, or if they'd simply be carrying their shields on their back. And of course now, in this version, we already know that Balian's been charged with working on the defenses of Jerusalem. So, his later ascension to marshal doesn't come as the surprise it was taken to be in the theatrical release.
The king had been very generous in actually loaning us about 1,000 men for months, on the basis that, you know, we fed them and we paid them extra as film extras. And initially they thought it was very amusing, thought it was going to be great fun, and then eventually, you know, like all filming, it can become pretty boring and repetitious, unless you're doing my job, and or you're, you know, cameraman or a first idea, then you're in a mad spin, flat panic all the time, so there's no time to get bored. And they're ironically dressed in Christian garb. What you'll see coming at you shortly is the same guys dressed in Muslim garb. So they thought that was very amusing. Besides, half the European army, the so-called Christians, would be, you know, all denominations. They'd be Spanish, French, they'd be swarthy, they'd be all, you know, the Scandinavians would be white Teutonics, but white hair, you know, blonde, but they'd be very, very mixed blood. Breton, is it? Very, like the Irish are very dark, but the Irish have properties of the Spanish. Northern Spain, Basque and Irish look very similar. They are similar, they're the same blood. So the idea of having Muslim doing the Catholic army was no problem to me whatsoever. All this wind that doesn't look like much, but that wind is blowing loose talcum powder dust, which is getting in your eyes, your nose, your horse's eyes, and then it'll suddenly change and go. The next shot the flags have gone down. They'll come back again in a minute. All those flags are blowing, that's real. You're talking about like a 50-kilometer wind, which raises up this fine dust, which everyone thinks the desert is clean. It hasn't. It's got 5,000 years of camel shit, and dog shit. Usually when the dust rises, people come down with things. Think about it. Thousands of years of people tracking animals, and then it dries to powder, blows in the end. Bob's your uncle.
I scripted Hattin, and we went through various ways of having Balian break out of it. Because as we know historically, he was captured there and ransomed, and then went to Salahuddin to ask permission to defend Jerusalem, which tells you a hell of a lot about both men, especially since Salahuddin granted permission. Hattin just would have been too expensive, and we had no need of it. No need of it dramatically whatsoever. And if you did the Battle of Hattin on a huge scale, you'd be at risk of making the siege of Jerusalem itself anticlimactic. As odd as that sounds, as big as the siege is. I do regret that in this we don't have Salahuddin executing the Knights of the Religious Orders, which he did.
I love it when we integrate like this, and I still raise that question. Here I am working with 1,000 Muslims every day, maybe 100 Germans, maybe 80 British, Spanish, Italian, you name it, they're there, and we're all there doing the same job. We're all trying to make a good movie with no politics, no problems whatsoever. Gassin was very good to talk to because he was a very good balance of awareness. He would say, well, this is good, that's not so good. I said, why is it not so good? Because. Okay. Would you do? No, I wouldn't. Okay. And it's about how it will be seen and protocol. I think even the one that you might regard as the feisty one, or the one who is, today's terms, we might call him a fundamentalist. But actually, I'm saying, well, if you're deeply Christian or deeply Catholic, you're a fundamentalist. You're believing in the fundamentals of your religion. So, unfortunately, the word fundamentalist has become a very bad association, when actually, really, just it means you believe in this, you believe in that, you believe in that, and you don't believe in anything else. But you're willing to accept that there are other religions. And one of the biggest things in the Quran is respect for the icons and of other religions and the other religions. So that's why the terrorist is not actually advocating what the Quran advocates. It's two quite separate ideas.
I thought that Ridley did a great job of portraying both sides of the story with great balance and truth. It was very brave from that perspective. I think what people expect from a movie like this is good guys versus bad guys, a hero versus a nemesis, and this was such a sort of huge period to tackle and story to tell, and it really couldn't be simplified. And I think that was one of the things that was so beautiful about it and courageous in terms of a film, I think part of what they tried to do with the cinema version was to simplify what was far too complex of a story, really. Ultimately, this film needs the extra levels that we shot to maintain the integrity of it, to give it the full weight, and meaning. And it's one of those films that I think you can watch over and over, this version, and see so many different layers within it, so many different aspects within it.
I thought of shooting the Hattin and the Battle of Karak, and I think I'd still be filming if I was doing that. No, I thought enough, because the problem is one savage event with swords becomes very similar to another, and as it is when we get to the battle, I'll talk about the battle. The battle ought to be enormous in terms of its scale, but You know, how many times can you watch a guy shooting an arrow, receiving an arrow, climbing the ramparts on a ladder, boiling oil, swords waving? So you've got to keep it alive. I mean, I think there could even be a monotony in that. Keeping things alive are usually about dramatizing it, are usually about, therefore, people and what they do, or people and what they say. So you're nearly always designing everything around the actor, which is the way it should be. So it's designing the 4 chapters of the Battle of Jerusalem. Jeremy never really wanted to do the scene. He said, I'd be a twerp to be seen. He used a stronger word than twerp, I might tell you. He said, I'd be an absolute twerp. He said, to actually come in here right off. He said, what am I, some kind of coward? And we talked about it. I said, no, not really, not at all. I think we fully understand this person is no coward. Futility. I think it's the futility of everything. And he said, and then we became ashamed. I said, that says everything for you. I said, if anything, it's kind of heroic that you're going away and leaving Jerusalem and everything you have there. And he would later go on down to, I think, live in Cyprus. I think he died about 7 years later. But ironically, I thought it turned out a really nice scene, because there is a futility to it, and he's ashamed, which is good. But he did love to be on a horse and did love to have all the old armor and all the gear on. He's a very good rider, and so it actually worked on every level for him. I thought it was great.
This is basically what I was brought on to do when I came down to Spain, first to Palma del Rio and then Seville, before we went to Morocco, which was to write what we called the siege book, because the siege in the original script was only a certain number of pages, and we needed the detail. We didn't want, another 20 pages in the script to scare anybody who was trying to budget it. So there was a separate document called the Siege Book by W. Monahan, Esquire.
The siege, God, this was a huge sequence. I think it took 6 to 8 weeks to film. It was this incredible set. In fact, the biggest set I think I've ever seen, and I've seen some pretty big sets. This was 4 quadrangles of each of the size of a football pitch, and it was a fully functional set, and by the end of the siege, we had oil down the walls, or at least black tar-looking stuff that looked like oil. It was just a complete mess. It was just brutal. It was like a war had happened there. And it really was like we survived the war, Ridley wrote this quote. He gave me the first poster of the movie, and he said, "We survived the war, congratulations." And it was so true. We really just did survive a war. It felt like that every day. This speech, I tell you what, every actor, I think, whenever they have a role, and there's always something in a script that you think, right, I've got to be really prepared for this. This is going to be a big moment, and I've got to get this and try and get this right and everything. And we'd been filming in the desert for at least 2.5 months by this point, and I'd been really sick. I'd actually gotten the flu, and I had been working 6-day weeks, and I didn't take a break. I didn't stop. I just kept going. And my voice was just completely shot. We actually got a voice coach to come and help. And I just remember thinking, it's typical that on this big moment that I was so amped and anxious about, and just, it was one of those moments that you think, right, I've got to prepare for, and I'd done all this prep, and then my voice just kind of just didn't feel like it was there. But again, I suppose it's in keeping with the character of Balian to be, he's so reluctant to assume that responsibility.
I do think we should have made it plainer that the reality of siege warfare at the time was that if you did not surrender, everybody in your city would be killed. So we'd know what the stakes were. I love the scene. My brother-in-law tears up over this one. And the knighting scene puts him under the carpet, so...
I remember saying to Ridley, I was like, God, it's... I was talking about doing that big speech and everything. And I came down the stairs and we went straight into shooting this. We got it all in like one afternoon. I literally had 2 takes on everything. And we sort of both realised that it was, I said to him, God, it's more about this moment, really. This is really the moment, you know. The big speech was like a warm-up for this moment where he basically knights the whole of Jerusalem to give them the courage and the fighting spirit to go out and defend this city.
Balian, in fact, did knight quite a few guys, mostly burgesses, not everybody. But he did do this mass knighting.
Now here we are back on the set. And I know Arthur so well now that we literally will design courtyards and corridors and gates and entrances with the full knowledge that we will recycle them again and again and again, either from a different angle or from different dressing. So, like for instance, the gates to Jerusalem, I used 4 different ways. I used them as the gates to Jerusalem. I used them as the prison which houses Renault, where I look across and through the gates and put black drapes down, relight it, put flambeaux, and so I got a prison suddenly, right? I used it also as a kind of Jerusalem tea shop, and then as a Jerusalem architrave, just with a different change of light and dressing. That's how you keep the prices of these films down, because this film, by normal standards for this kind of movie, wasn't expensive. Jerusalem had 1 million people in it. That's a lot of people in one spot, particularly in those days. So it was quite a city, quite a metropolis. It's kind of like Rome as well. I mean, Rome was, at the time, I was shocked to find that Rome had tenements, slums, and 1 million people on top of each other. Jerusalem was the same thing. I think Jerusalem was very hilly, up and downy, and I had to build this on the flat in the desert. I elected to say, right, I want it right behind the studio. I want to be able to walk out to if I want to, or drive out there. It's like half a mile around the back. We can use the services of the studio, and it was a very practical thing to do.
I think one of the greatest things that was done here was making the siege begin at night. We got away from some very well-trodden turf. Big desert daylight CGI, the spectacle stuff, just wasn't doing it. And doing it at night was a great idea in itself. The execution of it was amazing. Just amazing. I'm not too sure about the historicity of fireballs.
I don't think you'd quite get away with this, because I doubt those firing devices would be at more than 300, maybe 400 meters. That's a long throw. But I figured if it was a dark night, why not let them have it first at night? I don't know whether this happened or not, but I'd do that first. I'd pound the shit out of you to start with, and then actually come full bore the next morning at dawn. What he does is he gets his war machines out the way, so that he has something left. And he's invested in a rangefinder. The ballistics of that machine are going to be inconsistent, but you're going to look at this and go, vaguely 200 pounds going to fly, if you're lucky, 600 feet. So all I've got to do is worry about the angle. People found that fascinating. You see them measuring out and painting on the ground as the white rocks. Because when you think about it, that's a rangefinder. They said that they used to do that. I said, absolutely. I don't know. But that's the problem. That's one of the things you've got to sit there thinking, what are we going to do, you know? People hacking each other with swords and arrows are going to run out of interest very quickly. That's why the forest punch-up is such a good one, because it's a completely treacherous raid. It's an ambush. And there's 5 stories all going at once, so that was interesting. So it could be over, crash, wallop, banging, completely efficient and violent. That feels real for me, that one. These actual machines, which were built by Neil Cobalt and his brothers, could actually fire a sturdy stone about 250, 300 yards. So we'd all say, yeah, sure. He said, no, it's going to fire. So we'd all stand back, and everyone would stand back there with a cup of coffee and then on the desert, because he just assembled it, because they made them in Canada, because of the timbers. And I noticed that the first time we pulled the pin out, they were so dangerous that no one would stand near it. because he's got this giant slingshot. And if you got caught in that, it'd fling you 600 feet or pull your legs out. And so we had this pin on a rope. I said, what do you mean? We can't have people standing near it? And he said, well, I don't know how it's going to work yet. And it did. He pulled it and it went wham, and it was like amazing. Full bore slingshot value. So you're dragging the rope underneath the machine, which is going in like a gutter, a long wooden chute. So as the arm goes up, the volition between it leaving the end of the chute and coming around, this is the volition here. That last arc is the maximum final punch. So at its peak, it will eject the ball. And of course, like the Romans, they would kerosene the hell out of, or Greek oil the hell out of anything they're going to attack. So it was a very simple thing. I used that again, before that in Gladiator, thinking it makes sense. The battle lasted actually 10 days, in actual fact. And so I said, should I do day 1 to day 10? And then have Salahuddin gradually realize, shit, I've got to get out of here. Or I am actually destroying the holy city. What do I do? That became the argument for Balian, who finally says to him, if you continue, you're going to destroy this holy place. And us in it. And that was always good logic to me. And we tried the 1 to 10, it was laborious. So we finally got it down to this, and then I was thinking about how do I evolve and keep all the people alive throughout the battle? How do I keep her alive? Because it's hard in the script, she kind of just disappears. Once the battle starts and comes back in, then you can't do that. I don't want to lose Saladin in a morass of 1,000 men with a little head going, charge, You've got to give them positions and places, because once you look at that shot, once you're in something like that where there's maybe 80,000 in the shot, that's what the shot's about. It's not about anything else. And therefore inventing this here, saying, well, this was a late invention. I thought if he sees the Muslim flag goes to the top, he goes, yes, because that would be tremendous psychologically. And what he's been prepping and planning is the idea of a practical man, i.e. a blacksmith, would devise and say, they're going to come in, they're going to get close. I've seen the center of gravity is way too high. How could we pull them over? Because if I can pull them over, I can get literally like a domino effect. So each tower weighed 17 tons, literally, each. So how do I get ropes on them to pull them over? And then worse, once I got the ropes on them, how do I pull them over? Because there's not enough manpower to pull 17 tons. So this idea here was bred and born over a space of about a week. I think now they're designing these little figures that will do anything from touch their toes to do a slip and a fall, and you can get anything you want. And it's fundamentally a wireframe figure that you then fill in with whatever you want. And the technology, I think, was developed probably through Gladiator. I think a lot went on to Lord of the Rings in New Zealand. Developed the technology there, then come out from there, back to England, took up at MPC. And so they already had a book, a digital book on what to do and how to do it. So Troy. On Troy, they did a lot of the effects, and yet Troy was fine. I was aware there, honestly, of the same figures running at the same pace across the plane. People don't function that way. Everyone's got to be different. And that's what they did. I'm sure I haven't looked over every shot saying there, and seen where they've got groups of 20 times 400, or groups of 20 doing one thing times 10 and spreading it all over the canvas, and then laying the rest in. So gradually you lose them doing whatever their movement is into a repetition, because at the end of the day, it's about perception of what you think you saw, right? But I think they don't do that. They would literally work out that somebody will run forward, shoot an arrow, get hit in the chest, fall. Two other would come forward, pick him up and drag him forward. I mean, they'd really work it out. So it was amazing. From the day I arrived to the day I left would be 6 months. Prior to that, Arthur would have his huge team of people. They'd be building Jerusalem for 5 months. Pretty good. Those are full-scale walls. Those walls are 56 feet high, with major scaffolding which run 1,000 feet down. So it's not, I mean, 1,000 feet's a long way to build, but it's a nice big hunk to key into for what then must happen is all the digital work that'll hook into it and keep the walls going and keep the buildings going. So I always felt that all these period films always look like this slightly small scale. They never get the scale right, and I've always felt that with science fiction. Well, the cars are always too small, the roads are too narrow. I thought we need major walls, and they're saying, well, but we'll never get up. I said, we'll bloody well get up there. So we really stood there and argued and blew in the face that the actual height of these walls would be, towers would be 56 feet, the walls would be 46 feet. That's high. Therefore, it's got to be deep. That means tunnels running through it like a battleship. So the depth of the wall should at least be about 8 to 9 feet. So you've got a real battlement. The thing that was really daunting was thinking, my God, how can I keep this interesting for what will eventually, almost certainly run 20 minutes? How do I avoid repetition? Will it be chapters? How am I going to get machines in and then have to get them back out at night? I've got into all the, my knickers in a twist, sweating over that logic, and then I realized you can't be logical. You just got to get them in and then jump back at night, because they must have pulled back the machine. You can't leave a machine standing there 6 feet off the wall. You got to get it back.
You know, I had what I'd written, what I'd imagined, what we talked about. Ridley had developed a bunch of storyboards of what he wanted to see visually, like someone had taken his sketches and gone and created rough storyboards for them. So the job was to synthesize what was in our head and make it into narrative on the page. And so that's what was done.
You see these siege towers, one of them actually burnt down. And those guys, those stuntmen, need to be given a medal. I mean, they all literally went on flames and flew off these siege towers, which were 50, 60 foot high. So they did huge drops. You know, they landed on cardboard boxes with pads and stuff, so on. So I guess what had happened was they'd put out the cardboard boxes and everything, and they'd put out the paddings, and they'd wrapped the set and left for the night. I guess the embers of one of the cardboard boxes hadn't quite gone out because the fire caught back up and completely burned down one of the siege towers. And I think there were 3 original siege towers. And, you know, all credit to Ridley. He didn't lose his cool. He said, put it in the back of the shot, we'll shoot it tomorrow. That was the spirit with which the whole movie was shot, you know. There was no obstacles. It was so inspirational.
This is one thing where it deviates from what was written. We were trying to figure out how to get the siege towers over. And I just wanted grapnels thrown. Grapnel hooks attached to rocks, which were blocks of stone, which were raised on derricks. And we went back and forth, and Ridley was really wedded to the idea of the scorpions firing the harpoons.
I had the art department make up those huge blocks of granite or stone with steel cages holding them together. And actually, they're only wooden boxes with polystyrene. And they're miniature, but they look huge. A block and tackle system, huge harpoons, and, you know, knock a pin out, mate, and away they go. You buy it, don't you? Everybody was standing on the set saying, that won't work. I said, well, that's the job of a director, you see. It will work, and we will do this. And you have to. Because they were always coming back with some other weird and wonderful block and tackle. It's too complicated. It's got to be instant. It's got to be like harpooning, Ahab harpooning, was it Moby Dick? You got to whack that tower. Once you get that thing idea going, then the idea of saying, oh, if there's two close together, one will fall and hit the other, collapse that, and then they'll all start to go down. And then why don't we cheat? Because there's only one tower we pulled over. That's digital effects. We then shift saying, well, what happens if we designed several harpoons? And that's how it evolved. And it becomes the set piece. That wasn't planned. That was planned over like 8 days before we did it. So that's at lunchtime, sitting with the art department with a pad and a pencil and saying, right, can you make these blocks? How big would you have to make them to make them look seriously heavy? Rational, we can do that. Block and tackle system, we can do that. How do we fire the harpoons? Well, we've got the guns. So later, I can't fire rope that heavy. Impossible. So that's digital. So the rope is digital. The harpoon really became just digital. Because we fired some harpoons, they were like, beep, they were hopeless. So they all became digital. Then the rest is cutting. Ping, pong, crash, butt wallop, zing, tower comes down. And people go, cool, that works. Even I went, cool, that works. If I didn't have that high point, I didn't really have a high point. Except until when they come to, and I thought this is a great idea, the sensible, common sense, and yet allowing that to be a discussion about if then he's not God. He doesn't get the fact we burn our bodies. And yet the Muslims don't burn the bodies, they lime the body. And seeing Saladin's misery, losing all his men like this. And Saladin wept at the Battle of Jerusalem when he saw how many people he was losing. Here's the entrance of Jerusalem. I said that what we had set up was no good. It's way too small. This is the wall. This is going to be a major bloody gap in the wall. So we went there night shooting, shot this arch, which is what they ride through at the beginning of the movie, to make it a sear and so block and stone it up as if it had been an old arch. Fill it in with block. They did it in a week. And we'll shoot again here and have big tree trunks as barriers and to shore up the bombarding is getting. It works. See, this is where all the wind works brilliantly. See that wind? That driving us crazy. This is like 60, 70 kilometers an hour, this wind. Everything's flapping like crazy, which is brilliant.
It was phenomenal. When those trebuchets actually went off, they worked. They all worked. That was the unbelievable thing. I mean, everything you're seeing is as real as it was on the day.
All the shields moving like an anemone. I love that, as they protect from the shrapnel or the splinters. By now, you're really kicking into ballistics, which are nearly impossible, and you're just thinking about a modern army. Because the way this ball comes in at the end, whacks through the wall, is like a shell.
Paul England, who did my makeup, was fantastic. He gave me that age and weight, the beard, the blood, and the eyes were sunken and hollow, and he's an amazing man. I loved this moment. It felt so real shooting this movie because everything was so unbelievably realistic.
Here's the last ball there. The last ball of the day. Bam. Whoa. Wow. That's good. It's amazing how sound helps, isn't it? But actually this is pretty good in silence as well. I was always worried about the collapsing of the bricks and the dust in the wall, thinking, how are we going to do that? And the MPC, I really trusted them. So I figured, why not? Let's just go for it. Can you do it? Yes, I can do it. So overnight, we had to bulldoze this into a ramp. So we had to say, right, hack the hole in the wall, tear it down, you got a weekend. I need tons of hardcore and rubble. as it were, so they can run up. How steep do you want it? Well, running up rubble too steep is they're going to be exhausted by the time they get to the top. So you've got to cheat the ramp so they can literally run up. Lay sand on it so you don't get turned ankles and broken legs. All this comes into play, you know.
The stunt coordinator on this movie, Phil Nielsen, he had his hands full. That was one thing that works, I think, very well for this film is the way that the sword fights and the fights are choreographed. They're so messy, so bloody and real. Phil did a great job of coordinating all of that. And Ridley has a real eye for a bloody battle, so they work great together.
I've been watching the crane, which is the, I don't know, it's a crane with the shaft, just a central shaft, which has got wings either side in the fabric. And those wings help to lift it. That shot, which is going to come in a minute, from a crane is up at 120 feet. The crane's at 120 feet. And I only thought that's the way to do it, because I watched the crane saying, how high can he go? And he said 120. Because I was thinking of a helicopter, but you know, there's something like, this is it. There's something about having a helicopter there would be like flattening the dust. It would be disastrous. So I thought the crane would be marvelous. And this is just one crane shot. And what it symbolizes, of course, is maggots consuming themselves, a morass of humanity eating itself up. I don't know whether that comes across or not, but that's what it is. And I always got that out of a person who used to be a fly fisherman who I knew, who said, want to see in there? And he opens the tin, and inside was this waving millions of maggots, all with their heads moving like that. That's what I thought, that's the way to do it.
In this one, we do go through to dawn, which is very important to show that the fighting has lasted all night and people have finally been exhausted. That wasn't obvious in the theatrical cut.
Already I was into kind of, this is like the Second World War, First World War. The trenches, the trench warfare, the big guns. Somebody said, would he sleep? After I said, I think he'd certainly be exhausted, he'd fall asleep. In the trench, did you sleep in the trench? Absolutely. They tore each other apart in the gap, and I think, so you have a break. The break there was to say, if they fought right up till they realized they had to retreat, because they weren't going to, only a certain number of people can get through that gap. So you're still jammed in the traffic jam in the middle. Somebody would sound, whatever it is, retreat or reveille, and they would all draw back. But which is what happened. They drew back. And I think he realized that he was actually going to tear everything apart. It may have been Salahuddin, actually, who figured that if they tore through that gap then, there'd be wholesale massacre. It may have been that he didn't want. And now you have the real negotiation. I like this. So this is what you design. You know, I've got to shoot this midday. So design a shadow, which makes the whole shot, you see. They run out there with a little miniature tent. I didn't want a tent. I want them to run out with a shadow shade. This is Gassan's one of his best moments, actually. The bizarre thing is you kind of like him. Somebody actually said, they lose. I said, of course they lose. I said, they lost Jerusalem. And then somebody said, yeah, but there's no need to have him dancing in the end zone. And I said, but that's what happened. That's okay. It's funny that I think I want to walk out from having seen a film slightly elevated from having learnt something. If somebody loses because they have to, then that's fine. If somebody wins, which is the usual way, then that's fine too. But in this instance, we didn't win. We got our butts kicked. And out of the generosity of this man, Salahuddin, he lets everyone live. He could have walked in there and absolutely tore it apart and washed the city with blood, and said he didn't. he said, very well, I'll let you off.
This is the exchange basically as it occurred. Except, of course, Balian also threatened to execute prisoners, which we don't have in this. Very important part in these negotiations. Do you offer terms? I ask none. Oh, it's just the way it was done. It's form.
I think the outcome throughout this film, the end of it all, is a positive, because you think, wow, that guy Salahuddin is really a pretty reasonable chap and actually is a fair negotiator and even has a sense of humor about. Balian says to him at the end, what is Jerusalem worth? And he says, nothing. And then with a smile, turns back and says, everything. So it's an ideal over which men fight, which is ridiculous. When in fact you should all be able to sit in that antique pile of stones together, you know, and worship what essentially is the same God. That's why it's crazy. It's about the same God. And I think in some ways the film could have been sold more at that level as a religious and therefore political narrative. Should have been not so much passed under, because I think there was an anxiety about that and negative reaction, when in fact I think it's a positive. Now what happens was that Salahuddin, to appease his more fervent group, said, I'm going to let them go. However, and there was a huge protest because they wanted massacre. They wanted blood for blood, eye for eye. He said, what I'm going to do, I've organized a toll. Everyone leaving has to pay a tax. The father, the highest, the mother, then the son. And then he realized then that a lot of them didn't have that kind of money. They're just working class people. So Salahuddin financed all those people who couldn't afford it. And at the very end of his days, Salahuddin died virtually a pauper because he was always giving everything away out of his own generosity. Amazing. Muslim community were very supportive of the film, full stop. I've got many letters and notes from various Muslim societies congratulating me for trying to present the Muslim in a clear and fair light, particularly the view and the ideas behind the notion of the Quran and what it means. I think the three Muslims felt really very accurate, felt really like very balanced and humane people.
Well, Sibylla cutting her hair, when the inhabitants of the city thought that the city was going to fall, they went into a state of extreme penitence. And, you know, one of the things they did at the time, you know, they'd cut their hair off as a demonstration that they'd rejected vanity.
The fight, everyone wants a sword fight, particularly between the hero and the antagonist. And I struggled with this, thinking, do I need it? Do I need it? Have I seen enough sword play? But we decided that actually the sword work was pretty good. But one could easily go straight from this to with the next scene, which is him leaving Jerusalem.
I, for one, am so glad that this sword fight is back in the film. I know Martin will be. We worked very hard on getting this fight right. Actually, I still have a couple of nicks. One on my left hand and one on my right wrist. A couple of scrapes. They're kind of happy reminders of that period of my life. When you saw Martin in the theatrical version disappear on the donkey, you missed the fact that actually he is Balian's nemesis. He is the physical form of what Balian is really fighting against. And so to have this completion at the end of the movie, it just really makes it whole. It was incredibly difficult, that sequence, because those pieces of Muslim hanging down, we had to negotiate those. We kept getting our swords caught up in the Muslim. It was it was so difficult. And then fighting through that tunnel, and just there was pots of red and yellow powder that just all kind of flew up in the air, and it was fantastic to shoot. It was really difficult, but we all knew it was going to be a great finale in terms of that fight. And when it wasn't in the theatrical release, I have to say I was really upset. I was devastated, because it needs to be there to round off the good versus the bad that got lost in the theatrical version, because Balian sort of is on a bigger journey. He's on a bigger journey of fighting the world and his sense of responsibility. But really, he's just this simple man.
The sacking was bloodless. There were no murders, no hackings, no beheadings. People were orderly. The Muslims went into the offices of the administration of Jerusalem and systematically burnt the documents. And Gassan said, make sure that the documents you're burning aren't perceived as holy papers, because we would never do that. We would never damage anything that was an iconographic representation of your religion. That's how the cross being put on the table ended up in the movie. I said, oh, okay, then I've got this idea. I want a cross on the ground. Would you walk past it? He said, I might not. I said, if the room was empty, he said, then a beautiful cross, a beautiful cross. I said, then I might pick it up and put it on a table. So then he said, nothing. I'd just walk on through it. He said, just as a protection of your symbol, of your faith, he said, it's very high on the rule book in the Quran that you will not do this and you will not do that. And he said, so we would always have respect for other religions, which is very interesting.
Salahuddin setting the cross upright has been controversial, but all it is a visualization of Salahuddin's actual personality, you know? Seems to me that's what film's all about.
The building that used to have a cross and will now be a mosque. This is exactly what they did at the time. They took the crosses down, put up the sign of Islam, and they didn't sack the churches. They took everything out and said, take it away. And then they redressed, washed the interior of the cathedrals with rose water and petals. Washed it, didn't burn it, which I thought was very civilized. These are rose petals. And then inside, the clerics are throwing rose water and petals. They're washing, basically cleansing the interior.
I think the best you hope for a movie is it becomes one of the good ones. One of the ones that comes on Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon, and you go through the roof. It's a whole new world now from when I was a kid. I'm only 45 years old, but when I was a kid, there weren't even VCRs. I'd wait for the good movies with the rabbit ears of the TV wrapped in tinfoil, and if Lawrence of Arabia was being broadcast from Rhode Island at 3 o'clock in the morning, there I was with, tinfoiled rabbit ears and a little audio cassette recorder. Even in its previous version, I still think Kingdom of Heaven is one of those movies classified as the good ones. We had a great struggle over the ending. I imagine that it would just end with the march toward the sea, and that Sibylla would be walking barefoot, leaving blood in her footprints, and Balian would ride past not recognizing her. The film would end there, but other minds prevailed. The point is, she just lost Jerusalem, poisoned her son. My thinking was she might not be ready for a relationship just now. And Ridley thought the same thing, but, this came out and it works. It was my passion at this point, my absolute passion to set up the sequel so that we could have the Third Crusade. Richard Coeur de Lion, Saladin, the Third Crusade. And then Balian going off to be Robin Hood. True. One sequel dealing with the Third Crusade, and then at the end of Crusade, Richard Coeur de Lion would give him some lands in England called Locksley. You know, Robin Hood has to come from somewhere.
You could have actually finished the film outside of Jerusalem when they, if you like, consummate the relationship where she takes his hand. But I always like to pay things off the full circle, and I like this idea of going back and even taking in the original quotes, which was his father's quotation carved into a beam, which talks about making things better, which is fair enough target, I think.
We shot this sequence, which is obviously the end of the movie, right at the beginning of the movie, within the first 3 weeks of filming. It was Loire where we were filming the blacksmith forge and everything, so they burnt down the forge, and then we shot this ending, and I remember thinking at the time, oh my word, I'm going to have been through so much on this movie. How am I going to portray that right now? But I think it actually works really well.
Somebody said, one of the audience research things, wasn't it a bit convenient that Richard Coeur de Lion happened to be there when he turned up the day he arrived back? And that's what that's what you're fighting. You're fighting with that kind of stupidity, those kind of comments. But so you just let it go, you know. Saying, well, you really want a full lecture on that, but it's kind of more of a symbolic idea that they will perpetuate this craziness for the next 200 years. Get it? All right.
I think there were a couple of different versions of the end of the film. One with Eva, Sibylla, and one without. And I like it. I like it that he returns with her. I like it that the love that they have is strong enough and it lives on.
And then the idea also, I think, of acknowledging his first wife, which I think was a nice idea. She plants the tree. He goes back to visit the tree. 3 years later, it's a 3-year-old sapling. On it is blossom. Not his kid, but there is blossom, so there'll be fruit from the tree. Look at that landscape, wow. It was marvelous there, actually. It was never that freezing cold, even though it was January, it was beautiful. It was crisp all the time. And because you're on a slope, it was always slightly springy and dry. That's great. Oh, yeah, he went on a crusade for another 3 years. Of course, on his way back, Richard Coeur de Lion was captured and ransomed. And while this was going on, King John thought that he lost his brother, therefore was now the king, and was trying to collect funds by creating taxes in Britain. So you have a beginning of full census of Great Britain. Like, you know, Joe Smith has 2 acres, 3 children, 16 cattle, or 4 cattle, 5 chickens, and his yearly income is so-and-so, and he works for so-and-so. It was a census. It was basically a census of Great Britain. And there's the beginning of bureaucracy and the Labour Party. But Richard Coeur de Lion has some pretty exotic characters down there with him, and a full-bore demonstration of absolutely monumental brutality by Richard. But I don't know why Richard was such an attractive figure in the battlefield, because I think he was a large man, handsome man, charismatically, I think, was more glorious than actually his reputation. And interesting, because he has the brother of John and the mother of Eleanor, right? Aquitaine. And I don't know whether Eleanor was dead at this point when he went down to the Crusades. Maybe she was dead at this point. But Dad, Henry I or II, was it? Locked up Mum for 17 years in the tower. 17 years. And had these 2 kids with her. Incredible. And he married Eleanor because he wanted Aquitaine, and he wanted northern France. And so he joined Great Britain to France by the marriage. Next thing is she's locked up. Fascinating. History. I've been to the castle when I was doing The Duelists, of where Richard Coeur de Lion was locked up, incarcerated for 18 months, in the Dordogne, somewhere. But the castle still stands, and the rooms still, you know, considering their age, are relatively good shape. Amazing.
King Richard Coeur de Lion, would have been just intensely tedious. He's what everybody knows about the Crusades. I could do him now in a sequel because I figured out a way to deal with him in fiction. Got a personal key to him as a dramatic figure, though a secondary figure. But there was no way I was going to crack in on the Crusades with Richard and Berengaria and the ices and fruits from Saladin and all the crap that everyone knows. Richard's war was nothing. It petered out and he went home. Period. After Acre, there's literally no drama. He moved down the coast a little and then he went home. Or tried to. And no interest in Richard.
It was an amazing time in my life. I was 27 years old and I was working on a huge production. I'd been fortunate enough to work on other big sword movies, like Troy or Lord of the Rings. But nothing really prepares you for tackling a movie like Kingdom of Heaven. I felt so lucky to have had this opportunity, and I wouldn't change any of it. I'm very happy to see the extended director's cut, because I think it really just gives you the full effect, and it maintains the integrity of the script and the story and the characters.
The guys who really tried to trounce us tended to have trouble with grammar and history and be the sort of guy that runs a website from their parents' basement or work for the New Yorker, which, as I get older, I'm finding is essentially the same thing. Some people are critics, other people are making theatrical motion pictures, you know, and there's a sort of class war between them, and I know because I've been on both sides of it now. As a younger man, I was a terrible, vicious reviewer, and my main point was the absolute destruction of anyone who was actually doing anything or making any money. And you have to realize that that's what's going on. You know, if you've done it yourself, then it's your turn on the barrel, I guess.
It'd be interesting to see how people react to this long version, because it's really the movie that we made. In fact, when I spoke to Ridley early on in the cutting room, he said he had 4 hours of usable film, 4 hours of a film that made good sense and worked. And so, you know, this is the 3-hour version, so it's the lean, mean version. And the 2-hour 15 was just, I don't know, it was another version.
We wrote and Ridley shot what, to me, is clearly one of the best pictures of the year. And something happened to it on the way to the theaters, and I just don't understand it. I think it was simply running time. We did this film heart and soul. The actors did it heart and soul. They came on because of the script, because of the characters. The message of the film actually touched people working on the film to the point where it was almost embarrassing. And, you know, now with this cut, you can see what Ridley did. You can see what was done. I have to say that I've never seen a finer act of artistic courage than Ridley's determination to make this movie. It's not a Hollywood film. It's an authored and serious film. It's a literate film. And finally, with this director's cut, it's made it through the mangle. I don't think some people know what they've seen when they see this picture. You know, they've got nothing to judge it by. But it's one of the good ones. I think it will stand the test of time.
We had so much fun making this movie. It was a joy to go to work every day. Every day was a force call, and I was like, whatever, bring it on. A force call meaning force majeure, which means you get only a certain amount of times at home to sleep and everything. And I was just like, I was going on like 6 hours a night, 6 days a week. I loved it. I loved being at work. And I remember Ridley saying, well, if the movie did well, he loves this period and he'd love to go back and do a sequel to it, you know? And obviously as There's as many crusades, it could go on, and I was just like, I would love to go back.
You know, I have to be concerned about how much it makes at the end of the day. I have to. I'll be stupid not to. So I think where this will play, which already has shown a significant market in the digital world. So already on the first disc that went out last year, I can't really say how much it made, but it actually starts to make sense as the reason to make this whole movie in the first place. So if it keeps on going up and you guys buy more, and I can go back to Fox and say, hey, I want to make the sequel, then I'll make the second one. In a flash. I'd love to revisit this situation.